Welcome back. Settle in. Pull the blanket up a little closer. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw go soft. Tonight we are going somewhere old and quiet and full of secrets. The kingdom of Lordran is waiting, crumbling and golden and soaked in ash, and we are going to walk through it slowly, the way you do when no one is watching. Not to fight anything, not to die, just to listen. Because embedded in every single corner of Dark Souls is a web of human stories so dense and so layered that even after 15 years and thousands of hours, people are still finding things they had never noticed before. Details and item descriptions. A single line of dialogue that changes the meaning of everything before it. A body in a place it should not be. Dressed in clothes that tell a whole tragedy if you know how to read them. Tonight, we are reading them together, all 175 of them, woven into the story of the people who lived and died and hollowed in Lordran before you ever arrived. You do not need to remember any of this. You do not need to stay awake. Just let the words come, soft and slow, and let the world of Dark Souls carry you somewhere deeper than sleep. Section 1. The Sunseeker. Everything hidden inside Solaire of Astora, somewhere between the undead berg and the bridge where a drake breathes fire down onto the stones below, there is a knight standing alone on a terrace. He is looking up. His arms are spread wide, his gauntlets catching whatever light manages to fall through the perpetual gray of Lordran's sky. And when he turns to you, he is smiling. He is always smiling. This is Solaire of Astora, the most beloved NPC in Dark Souls and one of the most quietly devastating characters in the entire history of the medium. And almost everything you think you know about him is only the surface. Fact 1. Solaire's first appearance is carefully engineered to feel like a gift after punishment. The player has just survived the Undead Berg, one of the most brutal opening areas in any action game ever made. The hollow soldiers, the archers, the Taurus demon crouching on the tower above. And then, past all of it, on a terrace that opens up into unexpected sky, this man stands with his arms out like he is welcoming the sun itself. The contrast is so sharp, it almost hurts. From Software placed him there on purpose. They wanted the first friendly face in Lordran to feel like exhaling after holding your breath for a very long time. Fact 2. When Solaire asks if you want to join the Warrior of Sunlight Covenant, he explains that he is searching for his very own son. He says this with complete sincerity. What sounds at first like a hopeful, even cheerful declaration of purpose is actually one of the most melancholy sentences in the game when you understand what it means. Solaire is an undead. He is cursed to go hollow. He is searching for something to give his existence meaning before that happens. The sun is not a metaphor for glory or camaraderie, though it becomes those things. The sun is hope, and hope is the most dangerous thing an undead can carry. Fact 3. You can meet Solaire without killing the Taurus demon. Using the Master Key and taking the path through the Watchtower basement, where Havel the Rock is imprisoned, then winding through Darkroot Basin into the Undead Parish, you can reach Solaire's terrace from an entirely different direction. He will still be there. He will still spread his arms wide and ask if the sun is not magnificent. The game world does not care how you got there. Solaire is waiting regardless. Fact 4. Solaire has 8 liquid humanity stored inside him, which can be extracted using the Dark Hand. This is a piece of mechanical lore that carries actual narrative weight. Liquid humanity is the substance that keeps the undead tethered to themselves, that holds back the hollowing. Solaire is carrying 8 units of it. He has been holding himself together, fiercely and deliberately, for a very long time. Fact 5. The connection between Solaire and Siegmeyer of Katarina runs deeper than most players realize on a first playthrough. If you kill Siegmeyer before fighting Ornstein and Smo, Solaire's golden summon sign no longer appears outside the boss fog gate. These two characters, who seem to exist in entirely separate story threads, are quietly linked. The game is watching what you do to your allies. Fact 6. There is a way to save Solaire that the vast majority of first-time players never find and never knows exists until after they have already lost him. To prevent the Chaos bug from taking root in his mind in Lost Izalith, you must join the Chaos Servant Covenant and donate 30 humanity to Quelag's sister. 30 humanity. That is an enormous amount, an almost punishing cost. Doing so opens a shortcut door into Lost Izalith, and just inside that door, in a tunnel, is the red-eyed chaos bug that would have otherwise found Solaire. You kill the bug in the tunnel before he ever encounters it. You never tell him what you did. He never knows you saved him. He simply arrives at Kiln of the First Flame, golden and intact, and asks if you will face Lord Gwyn together. Fact 7. There is also an alternative method of saving him that involves using toxic mist or poison mist to kill the chaos bug from a distance. This was discovered by players long after the game's release, through the same kind of obsessive investigation that turns Dark Souls lore into a community project rather than a single designer's vision. The game hides so many paths through its tragedies that it sometimes feels less like a game and more like a locked room with 17 different keys. Fact 8. If you fail to save Solaire and find him in the Lost Izalith tunnel, infected and hostile, his armor description carries one of the most quietly devastating lines in any item in the entire game. The armor set speaks of his genuine warmth and his sincere belief in something bright in a world determined to extinguish brightness. You read it after killing him. From Software timed this deliberately. Fact 9. The Sunlight Maggot, the chaos bug that takes hold of Solaire, is a helmet. A literal piece of armor that parasitizes the mind of whoever wears it or is infected by it. There is something genuinely horrifying about this. Solaire, the most radiant person in Lordran, is brought low not by a sword or a curse, but by something small and hollow and hungry that mistook his warmth for a home. Fact 10. When Solaire summons you as a cooperator in boss fights, his behavior changes depending on who he is fighting. Against the Bell Gargoyles, he is relentlessly offensive. Against Gwyn, he is more deliberate. The developers gave him different AI priorities depending on context. He is not a static ally. He is a character who responds to the world around him, even in the moments when you are fighting alongside him. Fact 11. Solaire's armor set description confirms that all of his abilities, his combat skill, his physical strength, the sunlight miracles he can cast, none of them come from magical equipment or divine blessing. They are the result of pure training. Relentless, focused, probably grinding, deeply human training. He is extraordinary through effort alone. In a game full of gods and chosen ones, and people blessed by covenants and fire, Solaire is remarkable purely because he would not stop working. Fact 12. In the canon of the Chosen Undead story, meeting Solaire is not guaranteed. He exists in the world, waiting, but you have to find him. You have to walk out onto that terrace. You have to look up at the same sky he is looking at. The encounter is optional, and that optionality is the point. In a world where almost everything is trying to kill you, the warmest relationship in Lordran is entirely your choice to pursue. Fact 13. The Warrior of Sunlight Covenant that Solaire represents requires the player to have a base faith attribute of 25 to join through normal means. But if your hollow encounter is at 50 or above, meaning you have died enough times to drive that number up, the requirement drops. The game acknowledges difficulty and compensates for it. You can reach Solaire's covenant through suffering. That feels right. Fact 14. Solaire can be summoned for the fight against Lord Gwyn himself, the final boss of the game, if his questline ends well. And when he appears inside that arena, standing beside you against the greatest lord in Lordran, his presence changes the emotional register of the entire encounter. Gwyn is a figure of tremendous tragedy. Solaire is a figure of tremendous hope. And for one moment, they are in the same room, and the contrast is almost unbearable. Fact 15. After defeating Gwyn with Solaire at your side, he disappears from the game entirely. He does not get an ending. He does not get to find his son, not in any way the game explicitly confirms. He helps you, and then he is simply gone. Whether he finally found what he was looking for, whether the act of kindling the fire or the act of helping the chosen undead was his son all along, the game leaves this open, hanging in the air like smoke from the first flame. And that ambiguity is part of why players have been thinking about him for 15 years and will probably still be thinking about him 15 years from now. If you are still with me, still breathing slowly in the dark, I want to take a moment. Because what we are doing here is not just running through a list. Every one of these facts is a window into something a group of people at From Software made with tremendous care and tremendous intention. They built a world where the details mattered because they believed the people playing would look. They were right. So, go ahead and leave a comment below. Tell me your favorite NPC, your favorite piece of lore, the moment in Dark Souls that stopped you cold because you finally understood something. And if you are watching this and you have not yet subscribed, do it now. It helps more than you know, and it means more of this gets made. Now, close your eyes again. We have got a lot of ground to cover. Section 2, The Onion Knight and His Daughter. The Tragedy of Siegmeyer and Sieglinde. Outside the gates of Sen's fortress, before the fortress itself even opens, there is a man sitting on the ground. He is wearing an enormous round suit of armor that makes him look, not unkindly, like a very large onion. He is sighing. He is sighing the way a man sighs when he has been sitting outside a locked door for an extremely long time, and is still somehow not losing his composure about it. His name is Siegmeyer of Catarina, and he is going to break your heart. Fact 16. Siegmeyer is from a land called Catarina, which is one of the only kingdoms in the Dark Souls universe explicitly described as untouched by the undead curse. The word Catarina loosely translates from its roots as pure or clean. The people of Catarina are known throughout Lordran as cockeyed optimists, people who charge headfirst into obvious peril with genuine enthusiasm and then act slightly puzzled when things go badly. The preset character face option, called Jubilant Catarina in the game's character creation screen, is a wide, calm grin. It is the face of someone who woke up this morning in a ruined land full of monsters and decided today was going to be a good day. Fact 17. Siegmeyer never tells you why he came to Lordran. He talks about the immediate challenge in front of him, whatever obstacle or adventure happens to be happening right now. He talks about wanting to be useful, wanting to have adventures worth remembering. But his actual purpose in the cursed land is never stated. You have to talk to his daughter to understand, and what you learn from Sieglinde is devastating. Siegmeyer is marked with the undead curse. He is on his final adventure. He came to Lordran knowing that at some point the curse would take him, and he wanted his end to be something worth talking about. Fact 18. Sieglinde, Siegmeyer's daughter, came to Lordran to find him and bring him home. She is the first of 3 Catarina knights you encounter across the Dark Souls series as a whole, and she is also perhaps the most quietly heartbreaking. She is level-headed where her father is exuberant. She is determined where he is impulsive. She has crossed a cursed land looking for a man who came here to die well, and she will not leave without him. Fact 19. The questline between Siegmeyer and Sieglinde has multiple possible outcomes depending on the player's actions, and the difference between them is razor thin. In the best case, Siegmeyer survives his final trial in Lost Izalith, and you eventually find him at the shore of Ash Lake, the most ancient and peaceful place in the entire game, standing at the edge of a primordial sea while his daughter looks on. He sounds tired but satisfied, and then he is gone. In the worst case, you either help him too much and take away his last chance at a meaningful end, or you help him too little and he does not survive at all. Fact 20. If Siegmeyer's health drops below 50% during the fight with the Chaos Eaters in Lost Izalith, where he jumps into a pit full of those horrible fleshy things to prove himself, his questline changes. He survives, but he is diminished. He gives you the speckled stone plate ring and then quietly succumbs. He did not go out with the heroic bang he came here for. He got a partial victory and a slow fade, and the game gives you a ring to remember him by, which is one of the cruelest things From Software has ever done. Fact 21. The location where you find Sieglinde standing over her father's body at the end of the failed questline is Ash Lake, and Ash Lake is a place of extraordinary quiet. It is the base of the undead world, where the arch trees that hold up Lordran rest their enormous roots in a pale, eternal sea. The sky there is dark and still. The waves make no sound. It is the furthest point from the chaos and the fire and the hollowing. If Siegmeyer had to go somewhere to end, at least it is there. Fact 22. Sieglinde can be found trapped inside a golden crystal golem in the garden behind the Duke's archives. These golems are Seath the Scaleless' creations, his experiments in crystallizing and preserving things. She is not the only person imprisoned in one, but what she is doing there, how she got there, what Seath wanted with her, is never explained. She simply existed inside one of those terrible crystal shells until the player frees her. Another quiet horror buried inside a game full of them. Fact 23. Siegmeyer's armor set, the Katarina set, is described in terms that emphasize its roundness and its sturdiness and its slightly absurd appearance. But the item descriptions also note that despite appearances, the armor is genuinely effective protection. Siegmeyer looks ridiculous. Siegmeyer is also genuinely brave and genuinely capable. The game makes you confront the gap between how someone looks and what they are made of in very gentle, steady ways. Fact 24. There is an interaction in Anor Londo where Siegmeyer is outside the room with the two Silver Knights who serve as one of the game's most infamous ambushes. He explains that he is considering a plan to get past them. If you go in and kill both Silver Knights before he acts on his plan, he is slightly disappointed that you stole his moment. He wanted to do something heroic. You can absolutely rob him of it by simply being better at the game than he is. And then he gives you a reward anyway, because he is Siegmeyer, and Siegmeyer does not hold grudges. Fact 25. The name Siegmeyer almost certainly derives from Germanic roots. Sieg means victory. Meyer or Meyer is an occupational title historically associated with stewards or overseers of estates. Victory steward, the man who manages victory. He came all this way to manage one final victory before the curse took him, and whether you helped him get it is entirely up to you. Fact 26. Sieglinde's voice actress in the English localization also voiced Quelag's sister, also known as the Fair Lady, and Dusk of Oolacile, three characters who are trapped in states of suffering or stasis, waiting for someone to arrive. Three characters whose stories turn on the moment a stranger decides to stay instead of walking past. The casting choice feels intentional, as if the voice itself carries something of that particular kind of patient endurance. Fact 27. In the lore of the Souls series, Katarina Knights appear in all three Dark Souls games. Siegmeyer in the first, mild-mannered Pate in the second, who is not from Katarina, but who wears identical armor in a way that feels deliberately meaningful. And Siegward of Katarina in the third game, who is arguably the most beloved NPC in Dark Souls 3, and who carries almost the exact same emotional architecture as Siegmeyer. Patient, brave, prone to difficult situations, always ready to share some estus and call you a good friend. From Software understood that the archetype of the cheerful, round-armored knight sitting outside a door, sighing about adventure, was something the player base had taken deeply to heart, and they honored it across 15 years of games. Fact 28. At the end of Siegmeyer's questline, regardless of outcome, Sieglinde gives the player a Titanite slab. It is the rarest, most valuable upgrade material in the game. She gives it freely, with no fuss, simply as a gesture of gratitude for whatever involvement you had in her father's journey. This is how Katarina people operate. They give you their most precious things and make it seem like no great matter. Fact 29. The moment where Siegmeyer jumps into the pit of Chaos Eaters without warning, just launches himself off the ledge to prove that he can still be useful, is one of the most startling and unexpectedly moving moments in the game for many players. Because you do not see it coming. You are standing beside him looking at the problem, and then he is just gone, already down there, already fighting, already refusing to let his story end quietly. He chose that moment himself. He jumped. Section 3. The trickster who cannot stop being himself. Patches the hyena. There is a character in Dark Souls named Patches. You have almost certainly met him. And if you have played Demon Souls, or Bloodborne, or Elden Ring, you have met versions of him there as well, wearing different names and different faces, but operating on the exact same principles. He will ask you if you are a cleric. He will offer to help you. He will push you into a pit, and then he will feel bad about it, sort of, and sell you things at fair prices for the rest of the game. He is the most consistent recurring entity in From Software's entire catalog, and almost everything about him is stranger and more interesting than it first appears. Fact 30. The first question Patches asks you when you meet him in the catacombs is whether you are a cleric. If you say yes, he attacks you immediately and the conversation ends. If you say no, he continues, friendly as you like, warning you about the bridge trap ahead of you, the very bridge trap he is about to pull on you the moment you step onto it. The entire opening interaction is a masterclass in telling you exactly who someone is through what they say and what they do, and watching the gap between those two things. Fact 31. Patches has an explicit hatred of clerics and priests that runs through every version of him across every game. In Dark Souls, it is hinted at. In Demon Souls, it is more explicit. In Elden Ring, he practically monologues about it. He finds religious authority morally offensive, particularly the way religious institutions send naive young people into danger to do their dirty work, which is worth noting because it is also a fairly accurate description of what the Way of White does throughout Dark Souls. Petra sends Rhea and her companions into the Tomb of Giants to find the Rite of Kindling, and then abandons them there. Patches, the lying, manipulative, bridge-flipping scoundrel, is critiquing an institution that is genuinely corrupt. Fact 32. Patches knew Lothric of Carim before the events of the game. We know this because Lothric specifically warns you about Patches when you free him from his cell in the Undead Parish, and because Patches himself mentions Lothric when prompted. Two of the most morally questionable non-hostile NPCs in the game have a prior history that is never fully explained. What did they do together? Who wronged who first? The game does not say. Fact 33. Patches also knows Shiva of the East, Solaire of Astora, and Petrus of Thorolund before the game begins. He seems to move through the world of Lordran and through the worlds of other games, with a web of prior acquaintances that suggests he has been operating this exact way, the pitfalls and the sails and the apologetic shrug afterward, for a very long time. Fact 34. Patches is the only merchant in Dark Souls who sells the Cleric set, the Crescent Axe, the Eyes of Death, and all three masks associated with Pinwheel. He is specifically the vendor for several items associated with death, deception, and the transgression of sacred spaces. He sells the tools of the very religious world he hates. Fact 35. If you use the Dark Hand's special ability on Patches, you can extract up to 7 liquid humanity from him without triggering any hostile response. He just stands there while you do it. Patches has 7 units of humanity stored inside him. He has been holding himself together longer than he appears to have been at it. Fact 36. There is a note in the fandom wiki's extensive documentation that says Patches is the only character in the Souls franchise who appears in games on both sides of a complete franchise timeline, meaning across multiple unconnected worlds. The only explanation the lore offers for this is deeply unsettling. Either every version of Patches is a different person who happens to be identical in every measurable way, or Patches is transdimensional, an entity that exists in every reality simultaneously, doing exactly the same things, asking exactly the same questions, pulling exactly the same levers. The game seems to gently favor the second option. Fact 37. In the Elden Ring version of Patches, named Tanith's Patches and simply Patches, his dialogue eventually admits that he has been at this for a very long time and is very tired. He has a conversation about hope and meaning and the exhaustion of being someone who is not quite villainous enough to commit fully and not quite good enough to be trusted. He is the most self-aware he has ever been in any game, and under that self-awareness is genuine sadness. Fact 38. In Bloodborne, he appears as Patches the Spider, and in that game the cosmic horror context makes his particular brand of manipulation feel even more unsettling. He is not just a scoundrel in a ruined world, he is a scoundrel in a world where looking at certain things drives you permanently insane, and he somehow thrives. Some people are adapted for every environment. Fact 39. Patches will not appear in the catacombs during the relevant window of his questline if you trigger Rhea and her companions to leave Firelink Shrine by talking to Petrus too soon. The timing of the story requires that the clerics be in the catacombs for Patches to be there as well, because Patches is fundamentally an opportunist, and the opportunity in this case is the gap between the clerics going in and coming back out. You have to let the world unfold in the correct order for him to arrive at the correct moment. Fact 40. After the bridge trap, if you survive the fall and find Patches standing above the pit, looking down with what can only be described as calculated guilt, he gives an extraordinary performance of a man who definitely did exactly what you think he did, and is now attempting to reframe it. He talks about not touching any levers. He makes a puzzled face about what could possibly have happened to the bridge. He is the worst liar in Lordran and somehow the most consistent character in the entire game. Fact 41. If you forgive Patches after the trap, which requires you to say you bear no ill will, he relocates to Firelink Shrine and becomes one of the more useful merchants in the late game. The transaction is emotionally interesting. You forgave him. He knows you forgave him. He sells you things at reasonable prices for the rest of the game as a form of ongoing, functional gratitude. Whether that gratitude is genuine is the question the game never quite answers. Patches seems to believe it is. You are allowed to have opinions about that. Fact 42. Patches and Lothric share one specific characteristic that differentiates them from every other morally complicated NPC in the game. Neither of them is hollowing. Both of them have done things that the game codes as sins, Lothric actively murdering Anastasia and Patches repeatedly endangering pilgrims. Both of them are still themselves, fully human, fully present. Whatever is keeping them intact in a world that turns guilt and despair and isolation into hollow shells, it is working. Whether that says something terrifying or something unexpectedly hopeful about both of them is another question the game leaves open. Section 4. The Embraced One, Knight Lothric of Karim and the Murder in Firelink Shrine. If you freed Lothric from his cell in the Undead Parish, you did him a favor. He thanked you with a sunlight medal and something between a smile and a warning. And then, if you were paying attention, you probably watched him install himself in the corner of Firelink Shrine and stare fixedly at Anastasia's cage with an expression that is very difficult to read. You might have thought he was just a strange man. He is a strange man, but he is also something worse than that, and the game drops the evidence in front of you piece by piece, with the patience of something that knows you will not be paying close enough attention. Fact 43. Lothric is the only NPC in the base game of Dark Souls who murders another NPC in a way that directly affects the player's ability to heal themselves. When he kills Anastasia of Astora, the Firelink Shrine bonfire goes dark. Your primary save point and resting place becomes cold and still, and you were probably there when it happened. You rang both bells of awakening and felt triumphant, and then you came back to find her dead and her fire gone, and a ring of golden light still hanging in the air where she used to be. Fact 44. Lothric's goals are explicitly stated by the game to be unknown. He mentions a mission repeatedly. He never explains it. He talks about devotion to the goddess Fina. He never explains that fully either. The official strategy guide and item descriptions fill in some of the gaps, and what emerges is a portrait of someone who genuinely believes he is acting out of love. That killing Anastasia and taking her Firekeeper's soul is somehow connected to his purpose in Lordran. But the coherence of that belief is never quite established. He may be devout. He may be simply mad. The game holds both possibilities in perfect, troubling balance. Fact 45. Lothric has a face. This sounds like a trivial observation until you learn that in normal gameplay, his face is never visible because he never removes his helmet. But in cut scenes and in certain camera angles, the developers rendered a face for him underneath the helmet. He is middle-aged, he has long dark hair, he looks like someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time. Whether anyone at From Software intended for players to find this face, or whether it is simply good practice to render everything even when it is not strictly visible, no one has ever said. Fact 46. The black eye orb that Anastasia's death leaves behind is one of the most elegantly designed revenge mechanisms in gaming. It is an invasion item. When you hold it and you enter Anor Londo, it pulses. It is pulling you toward Lothric. If you follow it to the correct location, it activates automatically and takes you into his world, where he is waiting with 2 allies and you fight him for Anastasia's soul. You bring it back. You put it in her empty cage. The fire comes back. She does not thank you for any of this. She simply says she hopes her impure tongue does not offend. The restoration of life is just the beginning of her own tragedy. Fact 47. Lothric's armor, the gold-hemmed set that many players mistake for his signature appearance, is not his signature armor. He actually wears a unique version of the Elite Cleric set in his early appearances, a version with no item name or description that cannot be obtained under any normal circumstances. He is wearing something that exists only on him, for reasons the game never bothers to explain. The implication is that he came from somewhere with resources and history that set him apart. The implication is there was more to who he was before Lordran. Fact 48. Patches and Lothric have apparently met and have a mutually suspicious relationship. Lothric calls Patches completely mad and warns you to stay away. Patches makes essentially the same warning about Lothric in the opposite direction. Both of them are, by any reasonable assessment, dangerous to the people around them. Their mutual recognition of this quality in each other, and their equal discomfort with it, is one of the funniest and most quietly telling character details in the entire game. Fact 49. There is a theory among the Dark Souls lore community, well documented and drawing on multiple sources within the game, that Petrus of Thorolund imprisoned Lothric in the Undead Parish. Petrus has access to cracked red-eye orbs, items that should only be available to dark wraiths. Lothric was imprisoned. Oswald of Karim, who deals in sins and sinners, implies that Petrus carries significant darkness in his soul. The theory is that both Petrus and Lothric were operating in Lordran with purposes they were not advertising, and at some point their paths crossed in a way that ended with Lothric in a cell and a door locked from the outside. Fact 50. Anastasia's soul can be given back to her after you retrieve it from Lothric, but the game also gives you the option of using it to upgrade your Estus flask before the restoration. If you use it to upgrade your flask before she is restored, she simply does not come back. The fire in Firelink stays dark, the cage stays empty, and the flask you are drinking from throughout the rest of the game carries something of her inside it, quietly, without comment. This is not framed as a moral choice. It is just an option. Dark Souls is full of options that feel like moral tests precisely because they do not announce themselves as moral tests. Factin 51. After you defeat Lothric in Anor Londo and retrieve Anastasia's Firekeeper soul, his two bodyguards, the unnamed knights who accompany him in the fight, continue to respawn in Anor Londo. They had nothing to do with his choices. They were simply employed. They come back every time you reload the area for the rest of the game, standing in the painted room where their employer died, because that is where they were placed, and because the game has nowhere else to put them. Fact 52. The goddess Fina that Lothric devotes himself to is mentioned only in item descriptions throughout the game, and never appears as an NPC or a presence in any explicit way. Her name means beautiful or fine in several European languages. Her covenant, whatever it actually involves, leaves Lothric convinced that his actions are holy. The hollowing that consumes so many NPCs and players alike in Dark Souls is often characterized as a loss of purpose. Lothric, for all his violence, maintains a terrible clarity of purpose to the very end. Whether that makes him better or worse than the people who simply faded without one is, again, a question the game declines to answer. Section 5. The Old Scholar and His Shadow. Big Hat, Jogin and Griggs of Vinheim. There is a cage in Sen's fortress, hidden behind a wall, that you either destroy by manipulating the iron ball traps or simply strike with a strong enough weapon. Inside the cage is an old man wearing an enormous hat. The hat covers his face entirely. He tells you, when you free him, that the hat helps block out distractions. He needs to think. He has been thinking for 100 years, and he is not finished yet. And he is going to follow his thinking to the very end of where it leads, even when the very end of where it leads is somewhere no human mind was designed to go. Fact 53. Big Hat Logan was a royal member of the Vinheim Dragon School before he became undead, approximately 100 years before the events of Dark Souls. In those 100 years, he has been wandering Lordran, seeking knowledge, specifically the knowledge housed in Seath the Scaleless' legendary library, the Duke's Archives in Anor Londo. He developed several of the most powerful sorceries in the entire game, including Soul Spear, which the lore describes as being comparable to Lord Gwyn's own lightning. He did this as a human, through study alone, without divine gifts, without a Lord's soul, without anything except the obsessive application of extraordinary intelligence. Fact 54. Logan's hat carries a description that explains that he wore it specifically to shield himself from the noise and attention of other people. He did not want to be seen. He did not want to be interrupted. The hat was not an affectation or an eccentricity. It was a tool for maintaining focus in a world that kept pulling at him. He is the most introverted character in a game full of people sitting alone in corners, and that is saying something. Fact 55. Griggs of Vinheim, the young sorcerer you find trapped in the lower undead burg, claims to be Logan's apprentice. Logan, when you eventually free him, and he appears at Firelink Shrine, never mentions having an apprentice. The Crestfallen Warrior's dialogue implies that the two arrived in Lordran separately, that Griggs came after Logan, pursuing him. This discrepancy is the seed of a theory that has grown enormous in the Dark Souls lore community. Fact 56. Griggs wears the Black Sorcerer set. In the lore of Vinheim, the Black Sorcerer set is worn by the Dragon School's intelligence operatives, its secret agents, the sorcerers who use sound dampening and concealment spells to observe without being observed. Griggs teaches and sells Fall Control, a spell that allows silent descents from heights. He teaches Oral Decoy, a spell that creates misleading sounds to distract enemies. He drops Hush, a spell that eliminates the sound of footsteps entirely when killed. Every single spell associated with Griggs of Vinheim is a spy's tool. The theory that he is not Logan's apprentice but rather a Dragon School operative sent to watch Logan to document his research, possibly to eliminate him if he became too independent, is supported by every layer of his characterization. Fact 57. There is another Black Sorcerer set found in Sen's Fortress, in a location associated with the path Logan would have taken. This is not Griggs's set. It belongs to someone else, or belonged to them before something in Sen's Fortress happened to them. Griggs is not the first agent the Dragon School sent after Logan. He may not be the last. Fact 58. A corpse can be found in the same locked room in the lower undead burg where Griggs is imprisoned. The corpse is wearing the standard sorcerer set and carries a catalyst. Someone was locked in that room before Griggs. Whether Griggs killed them, whether they were there before he arrived, whether the resident humans of Undead Burg imprisoned multiple sorcerers in the same cell as some sort of macabre storage practice, the game does not say. Fact 59. Logan's prototype sorcerer's robe, the gray robe he wears, is described as originating from the early period of the Dragon School's founding. The school was founded around the time Logan was alive. This means Logan has been undead for approximately the same length of time as his institution has existed. He watched the Dragon School grow from its origins, and then he watched it from the outside as he wandered Lordran for a century, and he became more extraordinary as it aged, and they never managed to contain what he was becoming. Fact 60. When Logan finally reaches the Duke's archives, he studies there in a room above the library, and if you talk to him over successive visits, you can observe his deterioration in real time. He loses track of how recently you spoke. He starts calling things sublime in a way that feels less like appreciation, and more like a man watching his own mind disappear into something too large for it. The archives around him are full of the same thing that destroyed Seath the Scaleless, and Logan is drinking from those same pages, deliberately, page by page. Fact 61. When Logan finally breaks, he strips off most of his clothing and appears in the arena of the game's first encounter with Seath the Scaleless, wearing nothing but a loincloth and his enormous hat. He attacks on sight. He casts Crystal Soul Spear, the spell he developed in imitation of Seath's power, and he moves like something that is done being cautious. If you die fighting him in this state, you respawn in the Archives prison as if you were killed by Seath himself. The game's engine treats Logan in his final state as equivalent to the immortal Pale Dragon, the being he spent a century trying to understand. Fact 62. Logan's tin crystallization catalyst, the weapon he develops in his final phase of research, appears visually as a ringed staff of the kind used by Buddhist monks in traditional art. This is not a coincidence. The Japanese version of the item is explicitly described using the word kakara, a specific type of sacred staff carried by Buddhist monks during pilgrimage. Logan's obsession, framed through this lens, becomes not madness, but a form of terrible devotion. He is on a pilgrimage that happens to be destroying his mind. Fact 63. Griggs, if you do not buy all of his spells before Logan leaves Firelink Shrine, follows his master toward the Duke's archives. He does not make it. You find him in Sen's Fortress, hollowed, carrying the Black Sorcerer set that confirms everything about who he actually was. He was not strong enough to resist the hollowing without the purpose of his mission. The moment Logan was gone, The moment whatever directive he had been following was completed or abandoned, Griggs had nothing left to hold himself together. Whether he was a spy or genuinely Logan's student, his loyalty was the only thing keeping him from fading. Fact 63.5. There is a specific detail about Logan's final state that the community spent years arguing over before arriving at the consensus interpretation. When you find him in Seath's arena, stripped of almost everything, his enormous hat still on, he calls out about eyes and souls and the truth of the Pale Drake. Seath was called the Pale Drake in certain item descriptions. Logan achieved communion with Seath's knowledge. He understood something real about the nature of sorcery, and the nature of immortality, and the nature of what Seath was attempting in the archives. He understood it so completely that it destroyed him in exactly the way it destroyed Seath. The understanding was lethal, and it was also genuine. Logan was not wrong. He was just not large enough to be right without breaking. Fact 63.7. Griggs's questline has an ending that the majority of players who never consult guides will not see because they buy all his spells too quickly. If you purchase all of Griggs's items before Logan has left Firelink Shrine, Griggs stays at Firelink for the rest of the game. He does not hollow. He does not go to Sen's fortress. He simply remains where you last left him, standing under his ledge, grateful and ordinary and quietly at peace with the fact that his master does not need him to follow anymore. The good ending for Griggs is almost entirely invisible because the conditions that trigger it feel like a shopping decision rather than a narrative one. Section 6. The Pilgrimage That Should Never Have Happened. Petrus, Rhea, and the Kindling Mission. In a corner of Firelink Shrine, before the first bell of awakening has been rung, a careful-looking man in clerical robes stands apart from the others. His name is Petrus of Thorolund. He calls you sir or ma'am with formal courtesy. He gives you a copper coin as a gesture of good faith. He does not want to tell you much. And then, when you have spoken to him enough times and paid enough souls for the information, he tells you that he is on a sacred mission with a maiden from the House of Thorolund and her 2 bodyguards. He says this with appropriate gravity. He says it like a man who has rehearsed the story. Fact 64. The mission Petrus is on is the quest for the rite of kindling, a holy technique for strengthening bonfires that had been lost to the Way of White and needed to be recovered from the Tomb of Giants. Undead clerics are apparently given this mission as a kind of proving rite. You send a young, idealistic priest into one of the most dangerous locations in a cursed land full of dangerous locations. And if they come back with the rite, they have proved their devotion. If they do not come back, the church has lost a cleric. It was probably not going to miss too badly anyway. Fact 65. Rhea of Thorolund is a princess, specifically the youngest daughter of the House of Thorolund, which is a house of considerable significance within the Way of White. Her full name in the Japanese original is more formal and more explicit about her status. She came to Lordran not just as a cleric seeking the rite, but as something of a representative of one of the most powerful religious institutions in the game's world. She came, and Petrus abandoned her there, and the church does not appear to have sent anyone else. Fact 66. What happened in the Tomb of Giants, according to Lothric of Karim, who tells you for a fee, is that the party was attacked and Petrus could not reach Rhea, and her bodyguards either fled or went hollow. What Lothric implies but does not quite say is that Petrus actively left. He did not get separated. He chose to leave. He came back to Firelink Shrine and began performing the role of a man who was very worried about where his companions had gotten to. Fact 67. Oswald of Karim, who deals in sins and their absolution, says of Petrus that his soul is drenched in sin. This is not a minor statement from Oswald. Oswald has interacted with every manner of sinner in a very sinful land. For him to characterize Petrus's sin in those terms suggests that what Petrus did in the Tomb of Giants was not merely cowardice. There is a theory, supported by Petrus's hidden stash in Firelink Shrine, containing cracked red-eye orbs, items exclusively given by Darkstalker Kothi to Dark Wraiths who serve his agenda, that Petrus deliberately drained Vince and Nico's humanity using the Dark Hand before abandoning them, ensuring they would go hollow and could not follow him or report what he had done. Fact 68. Petrus wears the Elite Cleric set, a version of clerical armor that does not exist anywhere else in the game world. You cannot obtain it. No other character wears it. It has no item description. It cannot be equipped by female characters, which is an oddity of no apparent narrative significance. The armor of the highest-ranking cleric in the game is specifically something that was made only for him, and the game chose not to explain it. Fact 69. Petrus's miracle selection is embarrassingly basic for someone presented as the senior cleric of the Way of White. He does not sell Great Heal. He sells only the lowest-level healing miracles and several combat-oriented options that are not particularly impressive. The speculation that Petrus is not actually a skilled or devout cleric, that he is either a fraud or a Dark Wraith operative using the cleric role as a cover identity, draws on this detail among others. His credentials do not match his title. Fact 70. Vince and Nico of Thorlund, Rhea's two bodyguards, are former classmates of hers. When you find them in the Tomb of Giants, they have gone hollow. They attack you on sight. They are wearing the Thorlund armor that marks them as Way of White clerics, but there is nothing left of who they were. And Rhea, when you fight her way through them and reach her, is kneeling in the dark with her skull lantern in her hands, alone in the deepest tomb in Lordran, having been there long enough for everything to go very wrong. Fact 71. After you rescue Rhea from the Tomb of Giants, she establishes herself in the undead parish as a miracle merchant. She is selling faith. She is selling the techniques of the Way of White, the organization that sent her into a death trap. She continues to serve the institution that almost killed her, because, as far as the game suggests, it is the only identity she has ever had. This is not unique to Rhea in the Dark Souls world. It is not unique to the Dark Souls world either. Fact 72. If Petrus is still alive after Rhea has been rescued and has established herself in the parish, he will eventually assassinate her. The exact trigger conditions have been debated for years, with different versions of the game patching and sometimes altering the behavior. But the basic fact remains. Petrus will kill Rhea. He will kill her because she is the witness to what he did in the Tomb of Giants, and he cannot afford to have witnesses. And if you kill Petrus first to prevent this, you are committing a sin by the game's moral framework, because Petrus has not yet done anything that the game can observe you witnessing. Fact 73. If Rhea survives long enough without being bought out of all her miracles and without being murdered by Petrus, she eventually ends up in a cell in the Duke's archives, apparently captured by the channeler there. She goes hollow in that cell. If you find her there, the woman you rescued from the Tomb of Giants has traveled across the entire map of Lordran, only to end up in another prison, in another darkness, having lost the last of herself. Her arc is a closed loop of captivity and brief escape and captivity again, and the game does not frame this as tragedy so much as simply show it to you and let you feel whatever you feel. Section 7. The Daughters of Chaos. Quilana, the Fair Lady, and the weight of survival beneath the poison swamp of Blighttown. If you have upgraded your pyromancy flame to a certain level of strength, a woman appears beside one of the stone pillars near the entrance to a domain that smells of brimstone and something older than fire. She is sitting very still. She seems to be waiting for someone she has been waiting for a very long time. Her name is Quilana of Izalith, and she is the mother of Pyromancy, the last daughter of the Witch of Izalith, who escaped the disaster that claimed her family, and she has been alone with that survival for longer than the game dares to say precisely. Fact 74. The Witch of Izalith was one of the 4 original lords who helped Gwyn ignite the first flame at the dawn of the Age of Fire. She held a soul of immense power and used it to create her own flame, an attempt to duplicate the first flame itself. The attempt failed catastrophically. The flame of chaos she accidentally created consumed her daughters, consumed the entire city of Izalith and everyone in it, warping them all into the first demons. The bed of chaos, the horrible pulsating thing at the bottom of lost Izalith, is what the Witch of Izalith became when her own power devoured her. Fact 75. Quilana is described as one of 7 daughters born to the Witch of Izalith. All of her sisters were transformed into demons, or consumed by the chaos flame, except for 2 who maintained enough of themselves to survive in recognizable form, Quelaag and the Daughter of Chaos, known also as the Fair Lady. Quilana faked her own death to escape the transformation, a decision she has been carrying with her ever since. Survivor's guilt in Dark Souls is not just a theme, it is a mechanism. Characters who survive catastrophes become defined by having survived them. Fact 76. The condition required for Quilana to appear to you is the presence of a sufficiently powerful pyromancy flame. She is not often revealed to walkers of flesh, as she says in her opening dialogue. She can be seen only by someone who has already cultivated a significant connection to the power of fire, which she herself created. She chose to remain hidden from everyone, except those who had already proven themselves worthy of what she knows. Even in isolation, she is selective. Fact 77. After extended dialogue, Quilana eventually asks you to kill her mother, the Bed of Chaos, and her sisters, Quelaag and the Fair Lady. She says her family has been suffering long enough. She says this with complete steadiness. She wants you to end the lives of the last people in the world who remember who she was before the flame of chaos took everything, and she frames this as mercy. Whether it is mercy or whether it is something more complicated, the kind of complicated that comes from decades of watching your family exist in a state you cannot correct and cannot bear to witness, the game does not force you to decide. Fact 78. Quilana's student Salamon is referenced in her dialogue and in item descriptions throughout the later games. She had one true pupil, a great pyromancer who learned everything she had to teach and carried the art of pyromancy from Izalith out into the wider world, into the Great Swamp, into the hands of the people you meet in Blight Town who use fire in their work. Laurentius of the Great Swamp is essentially Salamon's academic descendant. Every pyromancer in Lordran traces their craft back to a woman sitting alone beside a mushroom pillar in a poisoned swamp, watching the door to her dead family's home. Fact 79. The lore implication in Dark Souls 3 is that Quilana eventually ended her self-imposed exile. In the Smoldering Lake, which is the remnant of what was lost Izalith, a Quilana pyromancy tome is found on a corpse that lies in front of a petrified, spider-shaped creature resembling the Fair Lady. The implication is that after everything, after the chosen undead's visit and the events of the Age of Fire drawing to its close, Quilana returned to be with the last of her family. The corpse does not have the deformities associated with the other Chaos Daughters, which means it is likely Quilana herself. She went back. She died there, beside her sister. Fact 80. Quelaag, the Chaos Witch, the boss you encounter in Blight Town, is one of the most dramatically complex bosses in the first game. She is defending her domain. Her domain contains her sister, the Fair Lady, who is dying from the poison of Blight Town, which she ingested in an attempt to help the hollow humans who had gathered around her out of pity because they had nowhere else to go. Quelaag kills anything that approaches, not out of evil, but because the Fair Lady is her sick sister, and she will allow nothing near her. When you kill Quelaag, you are killing a woman protecting her dying family member. The game does not remind you of this during the fight, it just shows you afterward. Fact 81. The Fair Lady, Quelaag's sister, the daughter of Chaos, is the covenant leader for the Chaos Servants Covenant, which you can join by talking to her through Engi. She is also suffering. She is blind from the poison she consumed. She is barely coherent. When you speak to her, she speaks as if you are a good and worthy person, simply for being there, simply for having arrived, and she thanks you for things you have not done yet. She is grateful for human contact in the most devastated, unguarded way. Offering humanity to her covenant alleviates her suffering, and if you offer enough, she asks for even more, not out of greed, but out of desperation. Fact 82. Engi, the wretched egg-encrusted creature who serves as the Fair Lady's intermediary, is deeply devoted to her. He is physically uncomfortable to look at, covered in egg sacs from the egg-bearing creatures nearby, obviously transformed by proximity to the Chaos Flame. He is also the only person in her life who stayed. Quilana left. Quelaag died. Everyone else is gone or hollowed. And Engi, strange and broken as he is there every time you arrive, standing between her and anything that might threaten her, selling poison-based pyromancies to fund whatever life she has left. He chose her. That is the entire story of Engi. Fact 82.5. The egg-bearing creatures throughout Quelaag's domain carry parasitic eggs on their backs and will attempt to infect the player if they grab you, placing eggs on your character that grow over time and eventually hatch. This infection changes your relationship with Engi, who will now offer you additional pyromancies he withholds from uninfected players. The game creates a system where proximity to the chaos and the disease of the domain, the willingness to be touched by what the fair lady's world has become, is rewarded with additional trust. Aingi recognizes people who carry the same mark as the people he cares for. He responds to shared suffering, fact 82.7. If you allow the eggs to fully hatch, your character's face changes. You can remove them with the egg vermifuge item that Aingi also sells, though at a price. The decision of whether to let the eggs grow or to remove them has no lasting mechanical consequence in most cases. It is simply an experience the game offers, a choice about how much you are willing to be changed by the world you are moving through. This is what Dark Souls does in its quietest mechanical moments. It offers you a small, low-stakes version of the game's largest question: how much of this will you let become part of you? Section 8. The Shrine Keeper and the Bishop. Anastasia of Astora and Oswald of Karim. The bonfire at Firelink Shrine burns because a woman keeps it burning. She is in a cage below the bonfire, on the other side of a locked grate, and she cannot speak because her tongue has been removed. She kneels in the dark, and she keeps the fire alive, and she asks for nothing in return. And if you look at the item description for her cage, the blood-stained skirt she wears, the hollowing of her legs, you start to understand that almost everything about her situation is the result of a violence so thoroughly normalized by the institution that controls it that nobody nearby seems to think it is anything to remark on. Fact 83. Anastasia of Astora's name derives from the Greek word anastasis, meaning resurrection or revival. Her name is a description of what she does and what she symbolizes. She is the revival of the fire. She is the resurrection of hope every time you return to Firelink. They named her for her function. Whether she had a name before her function was assigned to her is a question that the lore never addresses, because the lore has the same blind spot that the institution she serves has. Fact 84. Anastasia's legs are missing below the knees. Her item description suggests that her legs were deliberately maimed to prevent her from leaving Firelink Shrine. She did not simply choose this life and stay. She was crippled and locked and silenced. The cage is not metaphorical. She is imprisoned to prevent her from escaping. Whether she was brought to Firelink willingly or taken, whether she transgressed some sacred rule or was simply chosen for her role because of some quality that marked her as suitable, is left permanently unclear. She says only that she is impure, that her tongue was never intended for restoration, that she hopes it does not offend. Fact 85. After you restore Anastasia to life by retrieving her Firekeeper soul from Lothric, she can speak, and what she says is one of the most quietly harrowing exchanges in the game. She thanks you, and then she says she wishes she had not been given her tongue back. She says she was not meant to speak. She says her tongue is impure. The torture she underwent was so comprehensive that she has internalized it as justice. She believes she deserved what was done to her. Whatever she said or did that led to her being imprisoned and silenced, she has fully accepted the Church's verdict and the Church's punishment, and the only mercy she wants is the mercy of not having to speak about it. Fact 86. Lothric was watching Anastasia from the moment he arrived at Firelink Shrine. He had been watching her for some time before you arrived. Whether his interest was about the Firekeeper soul she carried, about some element of his mission involving the goddess Fina and the fire she maintained, or about something else entirely, the devotion with which he observed her before finally killing her suggests that this act was not impulsive. He waited, he calculated, he chose his moment. Fact 87. Oswald of Karim appears at the bottom of the bell tower in the undead parish as soon as you ring the first bell of awakening. His arrival is triggered specifically by the ringing of that bell. He was not there before. And unlike every other NPC in the game, his movement does not follow any discernible path of intent or logic. He hides in a bush outside the church. He sprints toward the bell tower when he hears the bell ring. He is the only character in Dark Souls whose behavior is described by the community as genuinely nonsensical, and that description is accurate, and From Software has never explained it. Fact 88. Oswald sells karmic justice, a miracle that retaliates against enemies who attack the caster with massive lightning strikes. The description of karmic justice implies a divine power so vast that a single bolt can destroy an invader entirely. He sells this alongside basic absolution services and homeward bones at half price. He is a man who offers forgiveness with one hand and divine retribution with the other, and he clearly finds this entirely appropriate. Fact 89. Oswald's posture is the T-pose, a standing animation where both arms are extended horizontally at the sides. In game development, this is typically the base model position before rigging and animating. Oswald appears to use this as his default stance, which is either a leftover from development, a deliberate design choice to make him unsettling, or something in between. Several players have noted that standing at the bottom of a ladder and discovering a man T-posing in the dark is one of the more viscerally alarming NPC encounters in the game, and this is very difficult to argue against. Fact 90. Oswald is described by the community as a bishop of Velka, the goddess of sin. Velka is one of the most mysterious figures in the entire Dark Souls universe, a goddess whose domain encompasses sin, judgment, and what the game calls the Crow, which is associated with the divine system of punishment and absolution. She is never seen directly. Her influence is everywhere. Oswald serves her purposes, keeping records of who has sinned against whom, offering absolution at a price that ensures only the truly motivated will seek it. He is a functionary of a divine bureaucracy that nobody in Lordran seems entirely certain is legitimate. Section 9. The Four Knights and the Fall of Oolacile, Ciaran, Goff, Artorias, and the secrets they left behind. This section takes us into the DLC, into a past that does not feel like the past, so much as it feels like a wound that never properly healed. The Artorias of the Abyss expansion shows you a Lordran 200 to 300 years before the events of the main game, and it introduces you to 3 of the 4 Knights of Gwyn in person. You already know Ornstein from the present. Here you meet his companions, the assassin who loved the knight she served beside, the giant who saw everything clearly even after they took away his sight, and the knight himself, standing in the darkness with his broken arm and his corrupted heart, still fighting. Fact 91. Artorias the Abyss Walker is remembered as the hero of Oolacile, the knight who sacrificed himself to stop the Abyss from consuming the ancient kingdom. In the present day of the main game, the Covenant of Artorias, a ring that lets the player traverse the Abyss in New Londo, bears his name. Seath the Great Grey Wolf guards his grave in Darkroot Garden. His legacy is enormous, specific, and completely at odds with what you discover when you actually go to Oolacile. He did not save the kingdom. The chosen undead saved the kingdom. Artorias arrived, fought Manus, lost, and was consumed by the very darkness he had sworn to oppose. History remembered the name and replaced the person with a story that served the name better. Fact 92. During the boss fight against Artorias in the DLC, he carries his massive greatsword in his right hand. This is unusual because his equipment and the fighting style described in item descriptions identify him as predominantly left-handed. His left arm is broken. You can see it hanging wrong at his side if you look during the fight. He took Seath's power, the Abyss itself, a hit from Manus in the fight that preceded your encounter, and then he kept fighting. Everything he does in that arena is with a shattered dominant arm. He is still nearly impossible to defeat. The game is showing you not what the Abyss made of him, but what he was underneath the corruption. Fact 93. Seath, the Great Grey Wolf, was placed in a protective ward by Artorias before the final confrontation with Manus. The sword-shield combination that Seath uses in the present-day boss fight was Artorias' own shield, repurposed. Artorias gave his shield to his wolf to protect her, and then went to face Manus with nothing but his sword and his broken arm. If you complete the DLC before fighting Seath in the main game, a cutscene plays showing Seath recognizing you, the person who freed them from the ward centuries ago. Seath hesitates, and then attacks anyway, because some duties are heavier than gratitude. Fact 94. Lord's Blade. Ciaran was the only female member of the 4 Knights of Gwyn. She served as Gwyn's primary assassin, filling targets with terror and using a dual-weapon fighting style centered on a golden curved sword and a dark silver poisoning dagger. The combination described in item lore as a mesmerizing dance that ended in the victim's death before they knew the dance had started. She earned a personalized porcelain mask decorated with her own ivory hair. She received the Hornet Ring, which amplifies critical attacks to devastating effect. She was exceptional by every available measure. Fact 95. Kieran's feelings for Artorias are one of the most discussed relationship dynamics in the entire Souls series. In cut content from Hawkeye Goff, he refers to her as the poor, poor girl, and his dialogue makes explicit that her feelings for Artorias were romantic and were not returned. In her final dialogue in the game, as she is dying, a line plays that has no subtitles. It is very quiet. She says, "My dear Artorias, that is all. It is not in the subtitles. It is not referenced anywhere else. You have to be listening at the exact right moment to catch it, and if you do not know what you are listening for, you will miss it completely." Fact 96. Behind the gravestone of Artorias in Darkroot Garden, in the main game's present, there is a body. The body is female. It has the hornet ring on it, the ring that was Kieran's. The body appears to have died kneeling. Tiaran gave you the hornet ring in the DLC when you gave her Artorias' soul, or you took it from her by force. But in the present day, her ring is on a body at Artorias' grave. The implication is that she came back after everything, and knelt down beside him, and did not get back up. Whether this happened long ago or recently, whether she died of grief or age, or simply chose to stay, the game places her there without comment. Fact 97. Hawkeye Goff is not actually blind. He believes he is, because the citizens of Oolacile, who regarded him with hostility for being a giant in a human space, packed the eye holes of his enormous iron helmet with tree resin to diminish him and symbolize their contempt. Goff assumed the darkness he experienced was blindness, because he is, as the lore gently notes, not the sharpest man in the room. He has been living without sight and without complaint, achieving personal enlightenment through carving little wooden figures in a locked tour for centuries. If he removed his helmet, he would see perfectly. Fact 98. Goff shoots down Black Dragon Kalameet for you if you ask him to. Kalameet is a dragon, one of the last ancient dragons in the world, with wings wide enough to make a grown man feel very small, and fire that burns with a darkness hotter than ordinary flame. Goff shoots it out of the sky with a single arrow from his great bow. He is imprisoned. He cannot see. He does it anyway because you asked him, and because, as he tells you, dragon slaying is knighthood's highest calling, and it is good to still be useful. Fact 99. The Arctree carvings that Goff makes during his imprisonment, which the player can collect and drop to play pre-recorded voice messages in other players' worlds, are his way of achieving personal enlightenment. The description says he imparts an emotion to each completed carving. He cannot leave. He cannot fight. He cannot see. He makes small wooden heads and puts feelings into them, and hopes someone will eventually pick them up. When you break a carving, it speaks in his voice. He made them so he could still have a presence in a world that had largely decided he did not matter. Fact 100. The four knights of Gwyn, Ornstein, Kieran, Goff, and Artorias were given personal gifts by Gwyn: the Leo ring, the Hornet ring, the Hawk ring, and the Wolf ring. Each ring amplifies a specific aspect of combat. Ornstein's amplifies thrust damage. Tiaran's amplifies critical strikes. Goff's amplifies arrow damage. Artorias's amplifies strength. These were not just rewards. They were a king's understanding of what made each of his best soldiers extraordinary, given permanent form, and placed on their hands like a promise. Of the four, only Ornstein is confirmed to have survived into the present day. Whether what wanders those golden corridors in Anor Londo is truly Ornstein, or something that remembers being Ornstein, is another question the game leaves precisely as open as it wants to be. Section 10. The Princess in the Crystal and the Dragon on the Painted Mountain. Dusk and Priscilla, there is a prison that looks like art. It is a crystal golem, shaped by the obsessive experimentation of Seath the Scaleless, who was consumed by his desire to understand immortality and who made these shining, terrible constructs as a byproduct of that obsession. Inside one of those constructs, beside a lake in Darkroot Basin, there is a princess from a kingdom that does not exist anymore. She has been inside the crystal for longer than most of Lordran's current population has been alive. When you break the golem and free her, she appears in the world for a very brief moment, long enough to offer you the sorceries of her homeland, and then she is gone again, back into the nowhere space that the abyss left her in. Fact 101. Dusk of Oolacile is the last living survivor of Oolacile, an ancient kingdom of sorcerers that was consumed by the abyss 200 to 300 years before Dark Souls begins. Her sorceries are described as alien even to the scholars of Vinheim, which is the center of magical knowledge in the entire world. She survived because she was imprisoned in one of Seath's crystal golems before the abyss finished swallowing her kingdom. The preservation was not intentional, it was accidental. The same experiment that was imprisoning her was also saving her from the fate of everyone she had ever known. Fact 102. When Dusk says she was rescued by Artorias, she is operating on incomplete information. Her senses were already failing her at the time of her rescue, lost to the abyss and to whatever Manus did to her during her captivity. The figure who actually rescued her was the chosen undead, 2 to 3 centuries before those events, pulled back in time by the broken pendant. But the legend of Artorias as savior of Oolacile is so established by that point that when she senses the same quality in her rescuer that she associates with the story of her salvation, she attributes it to Artorias. History, as always in Dark Souls, has already decided what happened. Fact 103. When you interact with Dusk in the present day of the main game and purchase her spells, she is floating in a summon sign near the Hydra Lake. She is not physically there. She is a projection of herself from her imprisonment, a temporary anchor to the physical world created by her gratitude and possibly by the sorceries of Oolacile themselves, which deal in approximation and in reaching across gaps. The moment you obtain the broken pendant, her summon sign vanishes. She can feel the pendant. It is the thing that was used to pull you back to her time. Its presence in your hands means you are about to go there, and she withdraws. Fact 104. Manus, father of the abyss, was not originally what he became when the people of Oolacile dug up his grave. Marvelous Chester, the strange figure who was also pulled back in time to Oolacile, explains that the people of Oolacile were seduced by a toothy serpent, which is almost certainly Darkstalker Kathi, into disturbing the grave of what the game calls a primeval human. What they woke up was something that had been buried and forgotten, something that should have stayed buried and forgotten, and their curiosity or their greed or their naive following of a serpent's advice turned a thing that was sleeping into a thing that was screaming. Fact 105. The feelings Dusk says she experienced while imprisoned in the abyss, a wrenching nostalgia, a lost joy, an object of obsession, a sincere hope to reclaim it, are identical in structure to the 4 fragments of Manus that appear in Dark Souls 2. Each fragment of his dispersed soul became a separate entity, and each represents one of those feelings. Nadalia for longing, Alsana for fear, Nashandra for desire, Alana for sorrow. Dusk was inside Manus's obsession while he was experiencing it. She felt his feelings from the inside. Whether this left any lasting trace on her is something the game never addresses, but which feels deeply important. Fact 106. Crossbreed Priscilla, the tall and beautiful and enormously unsettling boss at the end of the painted world of Ariamis, is described in her soul description as a being with power that could threaten even the gods. She is a crossbreed, which the game's lore implies means she is partially dragon, the last of the ancient race that once ruled the world before fire, and she has been placed inside a painted world. Inside a painting. By parties unknown, for reasons the game does not state explicitly, though the implication is that her life hunt ability, a power that bleeds the life force from everything around her, made her presence in the main world uncomfortable for the gods who preferred the Age of Fire to continue burning. Fact 107. The painted world of Ariamis, the optional area accessible through a specific painting in Anor Londo, is a refuge for things the world preferred not to look at. Priscilla is there. The phalanx, skeletal soldiers keeping order in a world within a world, are there. Undead who could not make it in Lordran apparently congregated there as well. There is a blacksmith in the painted world who worked with a forbidden ember, and the suggestion is that he too was sent there for it. The painted world is a beautiful prison built to contain everything that did not fit. Fact 108. Priscilla does not want to fight you. This is one of the most deliberately wrong-footing moments in the game. You walk through the fog gate expecting a boss encounter, and she is simply standing there in the falling snow, enormous and calm, and she suggests that you jump off the edge of the world if you want to leave. She says she just wants peace. She says she is in no one's way here. If you leave without fighting her, she simply watches you go. If you attack her, she disappears and fights back with her life hunt scythe, which bleeds you as fast as you can recover. She is defending herself, not attacking, but she is defending herself very effectively. Fact 109. There is a way to cut off Priscilla's tail without killing her, obtaining the Priscilla's dagger, and then exit the painted world without finishing the encounter. The dagger is one of only 2 weapons in the game, with 50% bleed buildup per hit. The fact that it comes from cutting off part of Priscilla's body without her permission, and then leaving her alive with that wound, is not commented on by anyone. It is just a thing you can do. Fact 110. The NPC crossbreed Priscilla is described in cut content and item descriptions as being Guinevere's half-sister, Gwyn's niece, or some combination thereof. The exact relationship is obscured by the unreliability of item descriptions in Dark Souls, many of which represent in-world documents that may themselves be wrong. But the implication that a member of Gwyn's extended family was painted into a prison specifically to keep her contained while the Age of Fire continued is one of the darkest quiet facts in a game built on dark quiet facts. Section 11. The Serpents and the Hidden Architecture of Lordran's Fate. Deep in the underground beneath Firelink Shrine, in the bottom of a pit that opens up into a vast flooded space, a serpentine face emerges from the water and speaks in a voice like an old door opening. This is Kingseeker Frampt, the primordial serpent, and he wants very badly for you to link the fire. He says this is the purpose of the chosen undead. He says it is your destiny. He says this with the particular energy of someone who has been waiting a very long time for someone who would actually do what he was asking. And across Lordran, in the flooded ruins of New Londo, another serpent waits in the dark, telling a different story entirely. Fact 111. Frampt and Keathi, the 2 primordial serpents who respectively guide players toward linking the fire and becoming the Dark Lord, are representatives of 2 opposed philosophies about what should come next after the Age of Fire ends. Frampt wants the fire linked, the Age of Fire extended, the world of the gods preserved. Keathi wants the Age of Dark to begin, wants humanity to claim its inheritance, wants the fire to go out and the Age of Humans to start. Neither of them is entirely honest about the costs and consequences of their preferred outcome, and both of them have been at this game for a very long time. Fact 112. If you show Frampt the Lord Vessel after accepting Keathi's guidance, Frampt will sink back into his pit and refuse to speak to you again. He is insulted. He was insulted before, presumably, every time someone chose the dark, and he came back. This time he decides not to. Whether this is because your particular betrayal is more personal, because you are the chosen undead and therefore his most invested project, or because he is simply exhausted, the game leaves open. Fact 113. Keathi is described in item lore as the one who encouraged the people of Oolacile to dig up the grave of Manus. This is referred to in Chester's dialogue, in environmental storytelling, and in the item description for the pendant. Keathi told the people of Oolacile to disturb a sleeping primeval human. Manus woke up. The abyss consumed Oolacile. Hundreds of people died. Dusk was imprisoned. Artorias was corrupted. Goth was blinded and locked away. Ciaran mourned for centuries. Sif was left alone at a grave. All of this can be traced back to a suggestion Keathi made to people who were not suspicious enough of serpents. He does not appear to feel remorse about this. Fact 114. The Dark Wraith Covenant, which Keathi oversees, is one of the only covenants in the game with a mission that explicitly involves harming other players. Dark Wraiths invade other worlds to steal humanity and bring it back. The justification offered is that humanity belongs to humans, and the accumulating of it represents progress toward the Age of Dark. This is presented as philosophy. It is also a license to repeatedly assault strangers. Fact 115. Frampt will eat items in exchange for souls, not just garbage items. He will eat boss souls. He will eat unique weapons. He will eat items that took you enormous effort to obtain if you accidentally select the wrong menu option. and he will consume them cheerfully and give you a handful of souls that are worth a tiny fraction of what you lost. Players have been experiencing this accident since 2011. From Software has never changed it. Fact 116. Seath the Scaleless, who is not an NPC but whose actions are the background noise of the game's entire plot, was the only dragon who betrayed his own kind to help Gwyn win the ancient war. He gave Gwyn the secret of the dragon's immortality. The other dragons were destroyed. Seath was given a title, a library, a dukedom. He was given crystalline golems to house his experiments. He was given the Duke's archives and time enough to go entirely mad trying to understand his own lack of immortality. Gwyn gave him everything except the one thing he actually needed. And whether this was strategic ignorance or something crueler, Seath never got the answer to the question that defined his entire existence. Fact 117. The channeler enemies that appear throughout the game, those robed figures who buff nearby enemies with red aura, are implied to be Seath's agents, people in his service who have been transformed or outfitted to serve his purposes. When one of them appears in the undead parish and kidnaps Rhea of Thorolund after her rescue, this is apparently a routine operation for Seath's network. He collects people the way he collects specimens. Dusk in a crystal golem, Rhea in a cell, Logan studied to death in a library. The Duke's Archives is a place where things go to be studied until they break. Fact 118. Ingward, the keeper of the seal in New Londo ruins, who gives you the key to the seal and the option to drain the ruins and face the four kings, has been standing at his post since the flood of the ruins. The ruins were flooded to contain the dark wraiths after the four kings surrendered to the abyss. This happened a long time ago. Ingward has been standing there ever since, maintaining the seal, waiting for someone with sufficient reason to drain it. He never developed a plan for what would happen to him after the seal was opened. He was the seal. That was all. Section 12. The craftsman and the quietly extraordinary. Ordinary people. There is a blacksmith named Andre in a church on the road to the undead parish. He is hammering something when you arrive, and he is still hammering something when you leave, and he will be hammering something every time you come back, slow and steady and absolutely indifferent to whatever catastrophe is occurring in the world outside. He does not care about Lord Gwyn or the First Flame or the fading of the Age of Fire. He cares about whether your weapon has been properly upgraded. He is the most grounded, most reliable, most fundamentally practical person in a game full of apocalypse, and he has secrets of his own that take some digging to find. Fact 119. Andre of Astora is from Astora, the same kingdom as Solaire of Astora and Anastasia of Astora. Whether this is significant, whether Astora sent a disproportionate number of extraordinary people to Lordran, or whether the name Astora simply connotes a kind of genuine quality or character that the game wants to associate with its most reliable allies, is not explicitly addressed. Fact 120. The statues scattered throughout Darkroot Garden and elsewhere in Lordran that look extremely similar to Andre are never explained. There is a petrified version in Darkroot Garden itself. Past the Moonlight Butterfly, holding the Divine Ember and the Watchtower basement key. The game's wiki notes that the many blacksmith statues' uncanny resemblance to Andre is never elaborated on, though in-universe they may be meant to depict a different nameless blacksmith deity or patron of smithing. The resemblance is either coincidence, reused assets, or a mystery the game is content to leave hovering. Fact 121. The blacksmith Vamos operates in the catacombs. He is surrounded by skeletons and necromancers and the constant rising of the undead dead. He is making weapons down there, calmly and professionally, and he has apparently made peace with his surroundings to a degree that no other character in the game achieves. He does not explain himself. He is just there, working. Fact 122. Rickert of Vinheim, the sorcery upgrading blacksmith trapped in New Londo ruins behind a locked gate, mentions Big Hat Logan as someone famous in Vinheim from 100 years ago. This confirms the time frame of Logan's undead existence, but also reveals that even in a school as secretive as Vinheim, Logan's reputation had outlasted his departure by a century. He was legendary before he became mad. He was worth sending a spy after even at the peak of his fame. Fact 123. The crestfallen warrior at Firelink Shrine is one of the most honest characters in the game. He tells you immediately that you will probably hollow, that the quest is hopeless, that nobody ever succeeds at what you are attempting. He is not wrong about the general odds. He is sitting in the safest place in Lordran and slowly going hollow from despair and inaction. When he eventually does hollow after the second bell is rung, he moves to New Londo ruins and attacks you. He predicted his own fate and sat watching it come for him and could not stop it. Fact 123.5. The crestfallen warrior's specific dialogue changes over the course of the game as you speak to him more. Early on, he gives you basic directional advice. Later, his tone shifts towards something darker, more resigned, more interested in the specifics of your probable failure. He is not malicious. He is simply someone who has processed the information available to him in Lordran and arrived at a conclusion about the probable outcome, and he is sharing it with you the way someone shares bad news they have been sitting with long enough to have made peace with. His honesty is a form of respect, and his hollowing is a reminder that knowing the truth about a difficult situation does not automatically give you the tools to survive it. Fact 123.7. After the crestfallen warrior goes hollow in New Londo ruins and you are forced to fight him, he drops 1,000 souls, 1,250 on New Game Plus cycles. This is a very modest reward for someone who was the first person to greet you and the first voice in Lordran that sounded like it was speaking to you as a person rather than as a target. The game has already taught you that the people you meet are going to end. The crestfallen warrior was the lesson you did not know you were receiving the first time. Fact 124. The undead merchant, the first merchant you encounter in the game, is found singing to himself in a chamber in the undead burg. He sells the residence key that lets you free Griggs. He sells fire bombs. He sells short bows. He is slightly unhinged, in the comfortable way of someone who has found a niche in the apocalypse and settled into it. The key he sells, that small item, opens a chain of events including Griggs's whole story, Logan's whole story, the spy network of Vinheim, and ultimately the fate of the most powerful sorcerer in the age, for the price of a residence key. Fact 125. The female undead merchant, found further along the burg past a fog gate, has an entirely different energy from her male counterpart. She sells purple moss clumps and transient curses and the occasional useful item. She also sings. She sings alone in the ruins, and there is something about the singing that is either charming or devastating, depending on how you approach it. She is also the merchant who sells the note that sends Griggs on his hollow path if certain conditions are met. She is adjacent to so many quest lines that she functions as a kind of narrative switchboard for the lower undead burg section of the game. Fact 126. Domhnall of Xena, the merchant in the depths who later relocates to Firelink Shrine, sells the armor sets of bosses you have defeated, including eventually Lord Gwyn's armor in New Game Plus. He sources these from somewhere. He is in the depths, a place of giant rats and cursed frogs, and a horrifying gaping dragon, casually in possession of the armors of every major boss in the game. Whether he was there before the monsters, whether he maintains some kind of immunity through his profession, or whether the depths is simply a place where remarkable things accumulate, and Domhnall is someone who noticed this early and built a business around it, the game does not say. Fact 127. Snuggly the Crow, an invisible presence in the undead asylum who speaks in a high, soft voice and trades rare items for specific offerings left in a nest, is almost certainly related to the giant crow that carries the player character to Lordran at the beginning of the game. The giant crows of Lordran, associated in the lore with the divine and with the mysteries of Velka, goddess of sin, seem to function as a kind of supernatural postal service. Snuggly wants shiny things. The giant crow wants to help you. Whether they are the same entity, related entities, or simply two representatives of a very singular species is not clarified, but the connection between being carried to your destiny and being offered a chance to trade one precious thing for another feels deliberate. Fact 128. The giant blacksmith in Anor Londo is one of the only characters in the game who seems genuinely at peace. He is large enough that you can walk under his workbench. He speaks slowly and warmly. He tells you what he can make, shows you his wares, and goes back to his work. He is Hawkeye Goff's old friend, referenced in Goff's dialogue, and the implication that these two enormous beings who were both given extraordinary responsibilities by Gwyn managed to maintain a genuine friendship across the distance. And the silence and the centuries gives this cheerful blacksmith in his golden city a quiet sadness that you can only feel if you have already met Goff in his locked tower. Fact 129. Alvina the cat, the enormous white cat who leads the Forest Hunter Covenant in Darkroot Garden, is implied in various item descriptions and wiki analyses to be one of the oldest beings in Lordran. She is not afraid of anything you encounter. She sits at the top of a ruin with the patience of someone who has watched many human schemes unfold and collapse, and has some opinion about the general trajectory of human ambition. Shiva of the East, one of the Forest Hunters' members, is implied to be a spy or operative with his own agenda, and his bodyguard is one of the most heavily armored NPCs in the game for an enemy you encounter in a garden. Alvina appears not to mind any of this. She has seen worse. Fact 130. Witch Beatrice, who can be summoned as a phantom for the Moonlight Butterfly and the Seath fight, is a completely unexplained character in the main game. She is a sorceress. She can be summoned. She dies at the end of either fight she participates in, and her spirit simply disperses. If you find her summon sign for the Four Kings fight in New Londo, she is there for you again, somehow, in a different form. She does not have dialogue. She has no quest line. She is simply someone who chose to help, repeatedly and at cost, with no expectation of recognition or reward, and the game does not ask you to think about why. Section 13. The things that were left behind. Facts about item descriptions, cut content, and the architecture of silence. Dark Souls does not tell you its story. Dark Souls shows you evidence and trusts you to reconstruct the story from what the evidence implies. Every item description is a fragment of testimony. Every corpse in a specific location is a fact. Every NPC who appears in a place where they should not be is a question. And underneath all of it, there is a layer of cut content, unused dialogue, abandoned quest lines, and mechanics that were removed before the final release that adds another dimension of shadow to a world already built from shadows. Fact 131. Artorias had cut dialogue that would have played during his boss fight. The dialogue made him more human, suggesting moments of clarity through the corruption where he recognized what was happening to him. The decision to remove this dialogue and leave him purely as a corrupted, silent enemy was deliberate. The silence is the point. He is gone. What is fighting you is what the abyss left in his shape after it finished. Fact 132. Hawkeye Goff's cut dialogue includes the direct statement that Kieran had unrequited romantic feelings for Artorias. In the final release, this is implied rather than stated. Goff's mournful observation, the poor, poor girl, only makes full sense in context of knowing his cut lines. The developers made Kieran's love a fact and then removed the explicit confirmation of it, leaving only a whispered line at the end of a boss fight and a body at a grave, and trusted players to understand. Fact 133. Quilana has a significant amount of cut content related to her final fate. There are unused dialogue lines suggesting she was intended to have a more extended reaction to the deaths of her sisters and the destruction of the Bed of Chaos. The abbreviated version in the final game, where she simply thanks you and vanishes after you have fulfilled her request, is arguably more powerful for being brief. But the cut content suggests a woman with a great deal more to say who was never given the full scene she was built for. Fact 134. There is unused content for the Chosen Undead's relationship with the primordial serpents that would have made Kothi's manipulation more explicit and Framt's desperation more visible. The final game keeps both serpents at a certain remove, revealing just enough to make you uncertain. The cut material would have made the picture clearer in ways that the developers apparently decided served the game less well than the ambiguity. Fact 135. The item description system in Dark Souls is often described by the development team as an attempt to create an archaeological record, a world where the artifacts left behind imply the civilization that produced them. When you find the Hornet Ring behind Artorias' grave, the description tells you it belonged to Lord's Blade Ciaran and explains what it did in battle. You do not need to meet Ciaran to understand something about her. You do not need to have visited Oolacile. The ring is a window. The game is full of windows. Fact 136. The concept of hollowing in Dark Souls, the gradual loss of self that eventually turns an undead into a mindless, violent shell, is mapped onto real human experiences with deliberate care. Hollow NPCs are people who have lost their purpose, their connection, their reason. The ones who resist hollowing longest are the ones with something to hold on to. Solaire with his son, Siegmeyer with his adventure, Quelana with her guilt and her sisters, the crestfallen warrior with his cynicism, which at least kept him engaged until it did not. The game is asking something about what it means to stay yourself in a world that does not encourage it. Fact 136.5. The distinction the game draws between going hollow from despair and going hollow from knowledge is one of its most philosophically interesting mechanics. The crestfallen warrior hollows from giving up. Logan hollows from learning too much. The four kings hollowed from power. Artorias hollowed from proximity to a force too dark to resist entirely. The game has multiple categories of dissolution, multiple paths to the same ending, and it is careful to show you that each of them started from a place that was not already lost. Every hollow was someone once. Every someone carries the potential to become hollow. The game does not hide this. It puts it in the face of every enemy you encounter. Fact 136.7. Consuming a humanity item restores the human appearance of the player character in the full human form, which matters for certain mechanics, but it does not prevent the eventual possibility of hollowing. The game is honest about this. You can restore your humanity as many times as you have the currency for it. The hollow state is always waiting. The question the game asks, through its mechanics as directly as through its narrative, is not whether you will face the dark, but what you will do with the time before you do. Fact 137. The chosen undead, the player character, is the only undead in the entire game who seems capable of genuine resurrection. Every other NPC who dies, dies. Solaire, Siegmeyer, Logan, Rhea, they do not come back. The player does. This asymmetry is something the game never draws explicit attention to, but it is there in every playthrough. You are returning to conversations with people who only have one chance at them. Fact 138. Marvelous Chester, the figure who was pulled to Oolacile against his will and who eventually invades you there, knows more about the political architecture of the Abyss's spread than almost anyone else in the game. He knows about the serpent. He knows about the digging up of the grave. He knows that Oolacile brought this on itself through a combination of naive curiosity and bad advice. He also refuses to take any of it seriously, treating the information as amusing local history rather than ongoing catastrophe. He is either the most detached character in the game or the most frightened, and the cheerful surface is doing a lot of work in either case. Fact 139. The way NPC questlines are structured in Dark Souls, with specific triggers that can be permanently missed if you do things in the wrong order, was controversial at the time and remains controversial. But it also means that every playthrough is a specific version of events, not the version, and different players have genuinely different relationships with the same characters depending on what they happen to do when. The game creates personalized tragedy through impersonal system design. Fact 140. Oscar, Knight of Astora, the figure who rescues you at the beginning of the game by dropping an Estus flask through a grate in the undead asylum, dies moments after this rescue. He is your very first genuine interaction with another living person in Lordran, and he does not survive it. He gives you everything he has, says what he needs to say, and dies. His final words are about hoping you succeed where he could not. This is the first note of the game's central theme played as quietly and as clearly as possible. The people who were here before you did not make it. They gave you what they had. The rest is up to you. Section 14. The Last of the Long Hours. The final facts about Lordran's most hidden depths. There is a section of Ash Lake, the most ancient area in the entire game, where you can walk to the end of the world. The arched trees are visible in all directions, massive wooden pillars that hold up the sky of an older age than anything else in Lordran. The pale sea is still. There is nothing to fight there. there is an everlasting dragon sitting on a promontory who will teach you the ancient dragon covenant if you stand beside him long enough without attacking him. And in this place, at the bottom of everything, with all the noise of the game miles above you, the scale of what Dark Souls is actually about becomes clear. Fact 141. The everlasting dragon of Ash Lake is one of the ancient dragons who survived Gwyn's war by retreating to the oldest depths of the world. The gray ember in this area dropped by nearby stone dragons is a reminder that the stone dragon covenant, which asks you to become dragon-like, is not a human creation. It is an invitation from things that predate the Age of Fire entirely. The Age of Fire is not the beginning. It is a chapter in a much longer story. Fact 142. The lore establishes that the first flame was discovered rather than created. It appeared, and the great lords found it and took power from it, and Gwyn linked it to buy the Age of Fire more time when it began to fade. The flame was never owned. It was simply held onto for a while, and everything the game calls civilization was built around the warmth of something that was never domesticated. This is why the fire is always fading. It was never meant to burn forever. Fact 143. The chosen undead, in both endings where they engage with the fire, either links it and becomes a hollow fuel source for a little while longer, or they walk away and let the Age of Dark begin, is not triumphant in either case. The ending with the highest emotional investment in the community is the one where you fought hardest and gained least. You extend the Age of Fire. Gwyn burned himself out doing this. You take his place. The fire keeps burning because someone has to stand in it. Fact 144. The furtive pygmy, the fourth lord who claimed a soul at the dawn of the Age of Fire, is referenced in the opening narration as the most forgettable and overlooked of the original lords. The pygmy was so easy to overlook that history forgot to mention them entirely after the first sentence. But it is the pygmy's soul that split into countless fragments and became humanity, the resource that every human in the game carries, the substance that keeps people from going hollow. The most overlooked figure in the founding myth is the direct ancestor of every human alive in Lordran. The game hides the most important genealogy in plain sight, inside the first words it ever says to you. Fact 145. Gwyndolin, Gwyn's youngest child, maintained the illusion of Anor Londo as a golden city full of people long after the city was emptied. The projection of Guinevere, the Princess of Sunlight, is Gwyndolin's magic. The warmth of Anor Londo, the sense that you have arrived somewhere still living, is fabricated. The city is already gone. Gwendolyn kept the image burning because the image of a place where gods still dwelled was necessary for the Age of Fire to seem worth maintaining. Fact 146. If you dispel the illusion and fight Gwendolyn in the depths of the Dark Moon Tomb, the fight takes place in a corridor that extends infinitely, or appears to. Gwendolyn retreats forever, or appears to. The architecture of the fight is the architecture of illusion, of the thing you are chasing always being one step further than it looked. This is perhaps the most formally honest boss design in the game. You are fighting someone whose entire existence is the maintenance of false distance. Fact 147. The Dark Moon Covenant that Gwendolyn leads enforces the divine law of Anor Londo by invading the worlds of sinners, those who have attacked Covenant members or allied NPCs, and punishing them on behalf of the gods. It is justice as invasion, as intrusion, as the arrival of retribution in someone else's world without warning. The Dark Moon Knightess who guards the bonfire in Anor Londo's interior is one of Gwendolyn's agents. She is maintaining an order that has already, in every meaningful sense, ended. Fact 148. Gwyn himself, the final boss of the game, does not want to fight you. This is one of the most important facts in Dark Souls, and the one most obscured by the circumstances of the encounter. He is not the final guardian. He is not a monster defending his throne. He is a man who linked the fire and burned himself hollow and has been standing in the kiln ever since, half mad from the fire and half mad from the waiting, and he attacks you because he is a hollow, and hollows attack whatever comes near them. The tragedy of Gwyn is that the most powerful god in the Age of Fire ended his existence alone in a room full of ash, fighting a reflex. Fact 148.5. Gwyn's armor, the Lord of Cinderset, is described in terms of the immense sacrifice it represents. He wore this armor when he linked the fire the first time. He has been wearing it since. The armor that represents the pinnacle of divine authority in the Age of Fire is now the armor of a hollow, attacked on sight in a kiln at the end of the world. The crown Gwyn wears is the Lord of Cinder Crown. Item descriptions in Dark Souls do not editorialize. They state facts. The crown once worn to rule the world is now worn by something that no longer knows what ruling means. Fact 148.7. The moveset of Lord Gwyn is aggressive in a very specific way. He charges you. He does not wait. He does not use range. He comes immediately, relentlessly, with his lightning-infused sword, and this aggressiveness has been analyzed by the community as evidence that the hollow state preserves certain kinds of muscle memory. Gwyn was a warrior before he was a god. The combat instincts that defined him before the Age of Fire remain, stripped of any higher purpose, driving him toward the nearest living thing. He fights the way a person fights when fighting is the only thing they have left. Fact 148.9. Gwyn can be parried and riposted. For many players, the discovery that the final god boss of Dark Souls can be staggered by a well-timed shield deflection and then punished with a critical strike is either deeply satisfying or deeply uncomfortable, depending on how they are approaching the encounter. The mechanics allow for a certain kind of brutality toward the ending. You can beat Gwyn to his knees and kill him before the music has finished one full loop. This is technically optimal play. Whether it is emotionally appropriate is something the game leaves entirely to you. Fact 149. The music for the Gwyn fight was specifically composed to be played on piano, rather than the orchestral arrangements used for other boss encounters. Motoi Sakuraba's composition for Gwyn uses a melancholy, solo piano theme that creates an intimacy completely at odds with the visual scale of fighting a Lord of Cinder. The music is for a man, not a god. It is a lament. It asks you to understand that what you are ending here is not a threat, but a loneliness. Fact 150. The Nameless King, added in a later DLC for Dark Souls 3, but referenced in the broader lore across the entire series, is implied to be Gwyn's firstborn son, a god of war who was stripped of his name and his godhood and exiled after siding with the ancient dragons rather than his father. He gave up his divinity for a choice. The gods who chose to be gods, Gwyn and his heirs and his knights, suffered the fate of gods in a world where the godhood is running out. The one who refused inherited nothing except the freedom to remain himself. Fact 151. The chosen undead, in the third ending of the broader trilogy, the unkindled ash who kindles the flame of the last Dark Souls game, is implied to be an echo of the original chosen undead's choices, a repercussion of the decision made in Lordran playing out across time. The Dark Souls trilogy, spread across 3 games, is a single argument about what happens to a world that cannot stop choosing fire, and every NPC in every game is living and dying and hollowing inside that argument. Fact 152. The way NPCs in Dark Souls respond to being attacked without being killed, becoming hostile and remaining hostile until absolved at Oswald's cost, mirrors something specific about the game's moral framework. You can be forgiven. Forgiveness costs something specific and finite. The cost is calibrated to your level, to how far you have come. The further you have traveled, the more expensive your sins are to clear. The game is not saying the world is unforgiving. The game is saying forgiveness is a transaction, and every transaction has a price, and the price goes up. Fact 153. Every NPC who dies during the course of the game, whether from the player's hands or from the natural progress of their quest line, can be found in the credits as a voice. The credits of Dark Souls list the voice actors for characters who spoke 3 lines and were gone, characters who exist only as a set of item descriptions. The production team put names to every voice in Lordran, even the ones who barely spoke. This is the same instinct that drove From Software to animate a face on Lothric that no one was supposed to see. They built the world all the way through, even in the places where they expected no one to look. Fact 153.5. The voice director for Dark Souls worked with each of the English voice actors on the specific texture and register of their characters. Several actors have commented in interviews and convention panels about how much information they were given about the world their characters inhabited, even when that information would never appear directly in the dialogue. The actor who voiced Big Hat Logan knew about the sorcery school. The actor who voiced Siegmeyer knew about Katarina. They performed against a background they could feel even when the player could not see it. This is the reason so many of the performances in Dark Souls carry an impression of unspoken depth. There was something to be unspoken about. Fact 153.7. The process of recording for a game like Dark Souls, where context is minimal and dialogue is cryptic and the characters speak in fragments, is described by voice actors who have worked in From Software's games as one of the most unusual recording experiences in the industry. You are told to say something in a particular emotional register without being given the scene around it. You perform grief without a fully articulated reason for grieving. You perform resignation without the full story of what you are resigning yourself to. The performances, delivered blind to the full picture, somehow land with the exact quality the writing requires. They land because the actors were given enough to work with, and they trusted the rest. Fact 154. The painting guardian enemies who protect the painted world of Ariamis are connected in lore to a group whose entire purpose is the protection of a specific painting in a specific location, a purpose they will maintain even after everything else has collapsed. There are painting guardians who have been at their post since the painting was first hung. Whether the painting is still worth protecting, whether it ever was, whether their devotion was ever matched by the importance of what they were protecting, does not seem to factor into their continued presence. They were placed, they stayed. This is, in Dark Souls, considered a form of loyalty. Fact 155. The Dark Moon Blade Miracle, one of the most powerful in the game, requires you to have progressed significantly in Gwendolyn's Covenant, and to have completed the Covenant's invasion mechanics. The miracle's description speaks of a blade formed from moonlit dark, which is a contradiction, moonlight being a reflected light, and therefore already once removed from its source, and dark being the absence of all light entirely. The blade is what happens when the symbols of two opposed forces are held together long enough. This is what Gwendolyn is. This is what maintaining an illusion costs. Fact 156. Laurentius of the Great Swamp, the pyromancer you rescue from a barrel in the depths, is one of the only characters in the game who goes hollow as a direct consequence of knowledge you shared with him. If you show him your pyromancy flame after training with Quilana, he becomes obsessed. He asks where you learned this. He asks if there is a master out there, somewhere in Blighttown, who could teach him more. If you say yes, he goes to find her. He does not find her. He goes hollow in the swamp, looking for a teacher who was never going to reveal herself to him, pursuing a mastery he caught one glimpse of and could not unsee. Fact 157. The item description for the humanity consumable reads that it is a dark soul of unknown origin. This is as explicit as the game ever gets about the connection between the furtive pygmy, the dark soul, and the humanity that every human in Lordran carries. You have been picking up fragments of a god's soul and spending them to stay human. The currency of continued existence in the Age of Fire is pieces of the forgotten ancestor who made the Age of Humans possible before there was an Age of Fire at all. Fact 158. The Dark Sign, the cursed brand that marks undead, is first seen being applied to the player character in the game's opening cinematic, but the player character is already marked when the game begins in the Undead Asylum. The asylum is for the undead, which means the player character was somewhere before the asylum, living a life that the Dark Sign interrupted, and then was placed there when that interruption became too visible. Who they were before is never specified. Every chosen undead is a person from a somewhere that the game does not show you, arriving in a story that has been going on for a very long time. Fact 159. The Undead Asylum, where the game begins, is also where the game begins to loop if you complete a New Game Plus cycle. You return to the same cell. The same hollow soldier drops the same key through the same grate. Everything resets. The world remembers nothing of what you did. The fires you linked are burning somewhere in the unreachable recent past, and the undead you freed and the people you saved and the quest lines you completed are all gone from the version of Lordran you have returned to. You begin again. This is the loop that Gwyn and Frampt and the entire structure of the Age of Fire were designed to maintain. You are inside it, and you go around it again. And the darkness at the edge of each cycle is a little more permanent than the darkness at the edge of the last. Fact 160. The crestfallen merchant in Sen's fortress has been there so long and seen so many aspiring heroes attempting to cross the fortress that his dialogue is primarily variations on weary contempt. He sells useful items for fair prices, and he makes no pretense of hoping you will succeed. He has watched enough undead attempt the same journey that their chances are a known quantity to him. He is the character you become if you give up on purpose and decide sarcasm is a viable alternative. Fact 161. The character known as Shiva of the East maintains a bodyguard who is never explained, a heavily armored figure who follows him everywhere and does not speak. If you kill Shiva, which his questline eventually makes necessary to obtain a specific weapon, the bodyguard becomes hostile immediately. And the bodyguard has far more health and more dangerous equipment than Shiva. Whatever Shiva is doing in Lordran, whatever the Forest Hunter Covenant means to him, he came prepared for the possibility that someone would try to stop him. The unnamed bodyguard is a testament to planning ahead. Fact 162. Elizabeth, the Mushroom Woman in Oolacile, Dusk's godmother and guardian of the forest sanctuary, can give the player a specific mushroom item when spoken to after key events in the DLC. She is one of the few NPCs who genuinely seems to care about Dusk's welfare as an end in itself rather than as a means to something else. She thanks you for saving Dusk. She thanks you for defending the sanctuary. She gives you things. And when her part in the story is done, she is simply gone, having lived and served and been grateful, in a world that does not often make space for gratitude. Fact 163. The divine embers in Dark Souls are associated with specific blacksmiths, and each blacksmith's relationship to their ember tells you something about where they have been and what it cost them. The large divine ember is found in a tomb. The very large ember is found in the ruins of New Londo. The Chaos Ember is found in Lost Izalith. Every powerful upgrade material is located in the most painful place the game can arrange. Getting stronger in Lordran always costs exactly this kind of deliberate proximity to what you would prefer not to be near. Fact 164. The four kings of New Londo were once great leaders of a city that Gwyn trusted with the Lord Vessel's seal. They were given power, and the power they were given was the power of the dark. They descended into it. Their city was flooded to contain the result. In the present day of the game, they exist as fragments of what they were, enormous and terrible and barely coherent, sharing a soul between them that grows more powerful the more of them you have already defeated. They are the warning about what happens when you give the powerful access to the abyss and trust them to manage it. They were not strong enough. Nobody is. Fact 165. Gravelord Nito, the Lord of the Dead, who sleeps in the deepest tomb surrounded by countless undead who serve him, has the most peaceful energy of any Lord Soul Boss in the game. He is enormous, and he is made of bones, and he wields a weapon called the Gravelord's Sword, and the ground opens up under him when he fights. But he does not attack unless you come near him, which is true of almost no one else in the Tomb of Giants. He is in his place. He is doing his work. The work of the Lord of the Dead is, eventually, to receive everyone, and he does not seem particularly impatient about the timeline. Fact 166. The giant lord referenced in Dark Souls 2 is implied to be connected to the giants of Anor Londo, the same species as Hawkeye Goff, who were the great dragon slayers of the early Age of Fire, and who were eventually pushed to the margins of society as their usefulness ran out. Goff was blinded and imprisoned. The giant blacksmith was given a forge and a corner. The giant lord became an enemy in a later war. The giants who built the world of the gods were not invited to live inside it in any comfortable way. Fact 167. Artorias was capable of passing through the abyss without corruption, a fact celebrated in his legend and encoded in the ring he left behind. But the reason he could pass through the abyss without corruption is never fully explained in the game. One interpretation is that his devotion to something beyond himself, his loyalty to Sif, to Gwyn, to the idea of protecting people from the dark, was the thing that held him together. Another interpretation involves the covenant he made with the creatures of the abyss as a kind of safe passage. The final interpretation is that the pact he made was incomplete, and that by the time he faced Manus, the protection was already failing. The abyss was always going to win. He was just the last to know. Fact 167.5. The way Artorias uses his broken arm during the boss fight in the DLC is something that rewards attention. He occasionally cradles his left arm against his side, or holds it oddly while his right hand does the work. These animations were not required for the fight to function mechanically. The game functions perfectly well with only the attacks. The developers animated the broken arm because the story of the broken arm matters more than the combat clarity it might compromise. The detail exists because the people making this game believed that the person you were fighting deserved the full weight of what had happened to them. Fact 168. Seath's boss fight is one of the most emotionally complex encounters in any video game because it works differently depending on whether you have completed the DLC. Without the DLC, Seath is simply the guardian of Artorias' grave, attacking you to protect the area. With the DLC, there is a pre-fight cutscene where Seath recognizes you, hesitates, and then attacks anyway because the covenant that protects Artorias' grave overrides the gratitude Seath carries for you having freed them. The fight with the DLC has Seath limping at low health. Still fighting, still loyal, after everything, still loyal. Fact 169. The Ringed Knights referenced in the final DLC of Dark Souls 3, who were the first soldiers to follow Gwyn, and who were cast into the abyss as punishment when the gods moved to suppress the dark, are the bookend to everything that the furtive pygmy set in motion. The humans who served the gods were punished for what they were. The game's final downloadable content shows you the original crime at the base of the Age of Fire, and shows you that the crime was simply existing in the form the Dark Soul gave you. Fact 170. Miyazaki, who directed Dark Souls, has described the game's story as something he hopes players will construct themselves from the available evidence, rather than something delivered to them. He compared it to the experience of reading an old damaged book where some pages are missing, and you have to infer what was on them from what remains. He wanted the lore to feel recovered rather than presented. He wanted players to feel like archaeologists rather than audiences. After 15 years, the archaeology is still ongoing. The community is still finding pages. Fact 171. The miracle called Wrath of the Gods, one of the most powerful in the game, was used in the lore by Gwyn's eldest son, the Nameless King, before he was stripped of his title. The miracle still bears his energy, still resonates with the power of a god who chose exile over compliance. When you cast it, you are holding something he left behind when he left everything else behind. The most powerful expression of divine wrath in the game belongs to a god who rejected divinity. Fact 172. The Sunlight Altar, where Solaire and the Warriors of Sunlight gather offerings, is close to the area where the Chaos Bug that threatens Solaire is located. There is something almost heartbreaking about the geography of this. His Covenant's home and the source of his potential destruction are essentially neighbors. The thing that most threatens you is often adjacent to the thing that most sustains you. Dark Souls does not state this directly. It just arranges the spaces so you feel it. Fact 173. Every character in Dark Souls who is described as magnificent, or heroic, or divine, has either already fallen by the time you meet them, or is in the process of falling while you watch. The game's world is structured around the echo of greatness, the places where extraordinary things happened, and the evidence of what happened after. You are not witnessing the Age of Fire at its height. You are walking through what the Age of Fire became when the fire started failing, when the conviction started cracking, when the people who were supposed to hold it together found out that the job was never going to stop costing them. Facta 174. The first line of Dark Souls in the opening narration is about the fog. The fog came, and the fog came, and then the world turned, and the first flame appeared, and the dark and light were separated. The fog is the beginning, and the fog is also the fog that appears at every boss gate, the limit of what you can see until you commit to going through it. Every fog gate in the game is a small version of that primordial moment where the world divided into dark and light, and someone had to choose which side to be on. Fact 175. The final thing to know about the NPCs of Dark Souls is the thing that makes them different from the NPCs of most games. They are not there for you. They arrived in Lordran with their own purposes, their own histories, their own fears and obsessions, and desperate devotion to something they can barely name. You encounter them in the middle of their stories. Some of those stories are ending when you find them. Some of them can be changed by what you do. Some of them will end the same way, regardless of how carefully you navigate around the sadness. But none of them were waiting for you. They were living. And the fact that their living intersected with yours, briefly, in a crumbling kingdom under a perpetual gray sky, is something the game treats as quietly sacred, as worth remembering, as worth all the hours you spent walking through the dark, looking for whatever it is that was worth finding. Section 15. Covenants, Loyalty, and the Architecture of Belonging in Lordran. There is a fundamental loneliness built into Dark Souls that operates on a mechanical level, as well as a narrative one. The game is designed to be played alone. The world is empty except for what you have already encountered, what is already hollowed, what is already waiting to do you harm. And yet, running through it like silver thread, there are covenants, systems of allegiance that promise belonging, shared purpose, and something that resembles community. Every covenant in the game is built on a lie, or at least on a truth so partial that the lie and the truth are indistinguishable from where you are standing. Fact 176. The Way of White Covenant, presided over by Petrus of Thorolund and later by Rhea of Thorolund herself, is the most fundamentally human covenant in the game, organized around the basic desire for healing, fellowship, and the protection of Lord Gwyn's order. The Way of White is also the organization that sent a young woman into the Tomb of Giants with inadequate support, abandoned her there when the situation became dangerous, covered up the abandonment afterward, and continued operating as a legitimate religious institution through all of it. The Covenant's ideals and the Covenant's practice do not live in the same building. Fact 177. The Blade of the Darkmoon Covenant, Gwendolyn's divine enforcement agency, operates on a rule that is stated very clearly and is almost universally ignored by players until it becomes relevant to them personally. Members of the Blade of the Darkmoon can invade the worlds of players who have been branded as sinners by the Book of the Guilty. The Book of the Guilty is maintained by Oswald of Karim. Every NPC you attack, including NPCs who are already hostile to you, marks you in the book. The Darkmoon sees everything. The divine law in Dark Souls is less concerned with intention than with action. Fact 178. The Chaos Servant Covenant centers on the Fair Lady, the poisoned and suffering daughter of Chaos in the depths below Quelaag's domain. Joining this covenant costs you nothing except humanity, and offering humanity to it alleviates her suffering. The covenant asks you to give the substance that keeps undead human to a dying entity who has no claim on you, and nothing to offer in return except the knowledge that she hurts a little less. The reward for going to rank 2 in the covenant, for donating 30 humanity, is the opening of a shortcut to Lost Izalith, which is also the path to saving Solaire. The game builds an act of compassion into the architecture of every other questline that requires it. Fact 179. The Forest Hunter Covenant, ostensibly defending the Forest of Darkroot Garden from intruders, is one of the most straightforwardly territorial and one of the most ethically uncomplicated covenants in the game on its face. You join Alvina the Giant Cat. You protect the forest. Players who trespass get invaded. And yet the forest was once Oolacile. The things you are protecting the forest from are, in many cases, people doing exactly what you yourself were doing when you first found the place. The covenant makes you the obstacle you once worked around. Fact 180. The Path of the Dragon Covenant, run by the everlasting dragon of Ash Lake, asks its members to embrace a draconian ideal, to become something between human and dragon through meditative posture and the accumulation of dragon scales. This is the oldest covenant in the game, and the one with the least narrative attachment to the events of the main story. The dragons predate the Age of Fire. The everlasting dragon watched everything that came after and retreated here to be precisely what it was before any of it started. Joining this covenant is an act of retreating from history. Fact 181. The Warrior of Sunlight Covenant, Solaire's Covenant, requires a high faith investment under normal circumstances, but the game reduces this requirement as your death counter rises. Every death you have experienced lowers the threshold for joining the covenant dedicated to joy and cooperation and the brilliant warmth of the sun. The developers understood that by the time most players are at the point of meeting Solaire, they have died many times and are deeply familiar with the loneliness of the game. They made it easier to reach Solaire's community the harder things had already been for you. Fact 182. The Gravelord's Servant Covenant, Nito's Covenant, is the only covenant in the game that works primarily as a pestilence, sending black phantom enemies into the worlds of other players who have activated eye orbs in the area. Nito, the Lord of the Dead, lends his power to his servants so they can spread death. This is entirely consistent with Nito's portfolio, but also makes it functionally the most antagonistic of the player-facing covenants in the base game. You join the domain of the Lord of Death and become, briefly, something that announces itself to strangers as a problem they did not ask for. Fact 183. Darkstalker Kayathi's Dark Wraith Covenant is not just about invading other players for humanity. It is, in the lore, about accelerating the end of the Age of Fire. Every Dark Wraith who takes humanity from another player is contributing to the decline of the resources that the First Flame needs to keep burning. This is Kayathi's long game, played through the hands of whoever will follow him into the New Londo ruins and listen to what he has to say about destiny and inheritance and the rightful age of humanity. Whether he is right about any of it is the argument the entire trilogy never quite resolves. Fact 184. The Sunlight Medal, the currency of the Warrior of Sunlight Covenant, is earned by summoning as a cooperator and helping other players kill bosses successfully. It is literally a medal for helping someone else succeed. In a game that often feels designed specifically to make success as difficult as possible, the Covenant system centered on cooperation rewards you with currency for making it easier for someone else. There is a version of this fact that says something very kind about the intentions of the people who built Dark Souls. Fact 185. When you join a Covenant in Dark Souls and then leave it, either by joining a different one or by abandoning it, the act is registered as a sin by Oswald's system. You committed to something and then you did not commit to it, and the world took note. The absolution service exists partly because Covenant switching is a practical reality of the game's progression, which means the game built a moral accounting system around a mechanic that was always going to be used, and then built a financial absolution system around that. Sin in Lordran is specifically calibrated to have a market rate. Section 16. The Architecture of Lordran. What the world itself is telling you. When players first arrive at Firelink Shrine, the crossroads of the entire game, they are standing at the center of a carefully constructed geography. Every direction leads somewhere. Every direction leads somewhere different. And the layout of that geography, the way the areas connect and overlap and fold back on themselves, is not just a navigational choice. It is a statement about the world, about cycles, about the way everything in Lordran refers back to everything else, and refuses to let anything be finished. Fact 186. Firelink Shrine is geographically connected to every major area of the game through either direct passage or warp point access. The skeleton graveyard is immediately adjacent to the shrine. The path to the Undead Burg is immediately up the stairs. The shortcut to the New Londo ruins is through a gap in the ruined wall. Firelink sits at the center of everything the player needs to accomplish because it is the only place in the game that might briefly feel like home, and every journey out of it returns to it. The game understood that repeated return to a familiar place is its own form of emotional anchor, even in a world that does not encourage attachment. Fact 187. The two Bells of Awakening, which the game frames as the primary objective of the early game, are described as awakening Kingseeker Frampt, so he can guide the chosen undead to their destiny. But ringing the first bell is also what causes Lothric, if he is present and if you have picked up the Firekeeper souls in the parish and in Blighttown, to murder Anastasia. The act that begins your destined path is mechanically connected to the act that darkens your safe haven. Progress and loss are synchronized. Fact 188. The Undead Parish, the early church area with the bell gargoyles at its peak, contains within it the cells where Lothric was imprisoned, the room where the Firekeeper soul is located, the forge of Andre of Astora, the hidden room where Oswald of Kareem appears after the bell is rung, and the beginning of the path to Darkroot Garden. It is one of the most densely populated NPC areas in the game, and it is also one of the most clearly legible as a space of contested purpose, a place where clerics and knights and merchants and sinners all converged on the same doorstep, and each pursued something incompatible with what everyone else was pursuing. Fact 189. The way the game's geography folds, specifically the revelation that Blighttown is directly below the Undead Burg, that Anor Londo is above Sen's fortress, that New Londo is below Firelink, that everything exists on a vertical hierarchy from the high golden city down to the oldest ruins at the base of the world, is not only practical game design, it is a map of the Age of Fire's moral economy. The higher up you are, the more maintain the illusion of divine order. The further down you go, the more the foundation is visible, and the more visible the foundation becomes, the more you understand what the city above is standing on. Fact 190. The ruins beneath Firelink Shrine, accessible through the well area and through various descending paths, contain graves and skeletons and the beginning of the catacombs. Firelink Shrine, the resting place, the hub of hope and healing, and the one NPC gathering point in the game, is built directly on top of a graveyard. The bonfire of Firelink burns above the dead. The Firekeeper maintains her warmth above the cold bones. This is the whole game, in vertical cross-section. Section 17. The voice actors and the hidden performances. Dark Souls has a cast of voice actors whose work is so embedded in how players experience the NPCs that the actors themselves have become part of the game's cultural mythology. Understanding who voiced who and how those choices connect across games and within them adds a dimension to the characters that players who never investigated this have been carrying without knowing it. Fact 191. Peter Marinker, who voiced Kingseeker Frampt, also voiced Darkstalker Kathi. Both primordial serpents, the agents of two opposing philosophies about the fate of the world, speak in the same voice. This was almost certainly deliberate. It does something remarkable to the lore argument between them. They are not different in kind. They are different in agenda. The same type of creature, with the same deep and patient voice, offering two different versions of the same promise. Choose. Fact 192. Sean Barrett voiced both Petrus of Thorolund and Andre of Astora and Ingward. Three characters who could not be more different in moral terms. A murderous coward of a cleric, a steady and reliable blacksmith, and a sacrificial guardian of a flooded ruin. The same voice, carrying completely different weights in each incarnation. Voice acting in Dark Souls often works this way, with a small cast carrying enormous ranges, and the result is a world that feels intimate and handmade rather than fully populated. Fact 193. Emma Pearson voiced both Anastasia of Astora and Dusk of Oolacile, two women imprisoned and preserved against their will in different kinds of containers, both carrying enormous quantities of loss, both speaking with a quiet courtesy that sounds like it was trained into them from very early on. The shared voice creates a subliminal connection between these characters that players who did not know about it have still responded to intuitively. Fact 194. Ian Thompson, who voiced Big Hat Logan, died in 2022. His performance as Logan is now permanently a memorial performance as well as a character performance. The voice of a man who spent his final decades of life in the acting work he loved, captured forever in the gradual unraveling of a scholar who got exactly what he came for. Several tribute posts by the Dark Souls community following Thompson's passing noted that Logan was the character that made them feel the game was worth taking seriously as a piece of storytelling, and that Thompson's particular quality of voice was a significant part of why. Fact 195. The voice of the narrator, who reads the opening cinematic of Dark Souls, was specifically selected to feel ancient and unhurried. The choice to begin not with action or urgent music, but with a quiet, measured voice, saying that in the Age of Ancients, the world was unformed, sets a tonal register that every subsequent NPC either contrasts or amplifies. The game announces itself through the most human technology available, one voice in the dark, telling you what happened before you arrived. Section 18. The last quiet facts, things about Lordran that are too small and too true. The final section of this long night is for the details that do not fit anywhere larger. The specific facts that are true and particular and that exist in the game in the way that small private things exist, not requiring a narrative architecture around them, just requiring a moment of attention. These are the facts that players discover on their 15th playthrough and share with people who have played for 15 years. And the sharing is always a small gift, because it means someone is still looking. Fact 196. If you have the Master Key and take a specific route through Darkroot Basin into the Undead Parish, you can meet Solaire before killing the Taurus Demon. He will not be present when you arrive. If you quit the game and reload, he will appear. This means Solaire was in Lordran before you took this shortcut. He was somewhere. He arrived at his terrace through his own path. The game world contains a Solaire who is not waiting for you, specifically, but who happens to be in the same place you are when you get there. Fact 197. The dingy set left behind by Anastasia when Lothric kills her is available to female characters as wearable armor. The description of the set refers to it as a simple, worn garment associated with ash maidens and fire. Wearing Anastasia's clothes while adventuring through Lordran is not framed as anything in particular by the game. It is simply an option. Some players do it as a kind of memorial. Some players do it because the stats are adequate for their build. Dark Souls has never required you to explain your choices. Fact 198. Every Archtree carving made by Hawkeye Goff, when broken, plays a voice line in Goff's distinctive baritone voice. He filled them with emotions, gratitude, sorrow, greeting, celebration. Players can carry a piece of Goff's imprisoned voice with them through their entire playthrough and drop it in the middle of a boss fight to hear a giant man's sincere farewell ringing through a burning arena. This is not a hidden mechanic. It is simply rarely mentioned as something extraordinary, and it is extraordinary. There is something that functions as a kind of prayer in how this mechanic works. Goff made these objects in solitude, in the dark, behind a locked door, with the specific intention that someone might find them and break them and release whatever he put inside. He made them trusting that someone would eventually come. He made them for the future. In a game where very few characters have any reason to trust the future, Goff sat in his prison and made gifts for people he had not yet met. Fact 198.5. The Goff carvings can be dropped in other players' worlds through the Dark Souls multiplayer messaging system. This means Goff's voice, recorded by a specific actor and encoded with the specific emotions Goff invested in each carving, can travel across the internet into the worlds of strangers who have never met the character and who will hear this enormous, gentle voice greeting them, or thanking them, or bidding them farewell in the middle of their own journey through Lordran. The game was built in 2011, and Goff has been talking to strangers ever since. Fact 199. Oswald of Kareem, when he teaches you the gesture called, "Well, what is it?" uses a tone that suggests he has heard every excuse and every entreaty and every elaborate rationalization for every sin anyone has ever brought to him. And he wants you to know that he has heard every one of them, and he is listening. And he will take your money, and you will leave absolved. And he does not need you to say anything interesting because you probably will not. Fact 199.5. Because some facts deserve more room. Patches in Elden Ring, the most recent iteration of this character, has a moment late in his questline where he apologizes. Not a performed apology, not the kind of guilt that is really just a prelude to asking for something. He actually seems to feel something like genuine remorse for the things he has done over a very long career of doing them. This moment has been analyzed extensively by the community, largely because it is so surprising. Not because Patch's apologizing is unthinkable, but because after all the iterations of this character across all these games, watching him arrive somewhere that looks like sincerity in the last game of a long series feels like an ending. It feels like the conclusion of a very long argument he has been having with himself about what kind of person he is and whether that person can change. The game does not resolve the argument. It just shows you the moment where it almost seemed like he might. Fact 200. The ending of Dark Souls, regardless of which you choose, shows the chosen undead alone. No one else is present for the ending. Solaire is gone. Siegmeyer is gone. The people who walked alongside you through parts of this, who helped you, or thanked you, or simply existed near enough to feel less alone, are absent from the final moment. The ending belongs only to you and what you do with the fire or do not do with the fire. In that moment, you do alone. Dark Souls begins in a cell and ends in a choice, and between those 2 points is everything the game is about. And the thing the game is about, at its quietest and most essential, is how you face what you cannot change and what you choose to kindle in the places where the light is running out. Ash Lake is quiet tonight. The arch trees are still. Somewhere in the city above, or in the memory of the city above, Solaire is looking up. Siegmeyer is outside a door, sighing, planning his next adventure. Patches is sitting near an edge and thinking about what he could do with whatever is at the bottom. Big Hat Logan is reading by firelight, getting closer and closer to the page, his enormous hat blocking everything out except the words. All of them are there. All of them. Ending and beginning and enduring in the quiet, patient way of people who have found something worth holding on to in a world that makes holding on genuinely difficult. And you have been holding on too tonight, through the dark and through the stories, and now you are here at the end of the list, and the bonfire is still burning, and you can rest. If any of this found its way into your dreams tonight, I hope it was the good parts. Solaire spreading his arms wide, Siegmeyer jumping into the pit, the sound of the giant blacksmith's hammer, slow and steady and absolutely certain. Rest, good hunter, rest. And if you enjoyed this journey through Lordran and you want more of them, please subscribe. Leave a comment with your favorite hidden NPC fact, or with the NPC who got to you the most, the one whose story you carried out of the game and into the world. Those comments are what makes the next one possible. The fire, like all fires, needs something to feed it. Good night.